Hello guys, welcome to Percy Fiction. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto Reborn is brother of Percy in world of Percy Jackson? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. The Oldsmobile groaned under the strain of the torrential rain, its wipers fighting a losing battle against the deluge that turned the world outside into a smeared watercolor of gray and green. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of wet asphalt and the faint, comforting aroma of the blue raspberry candy Sally Jackson was nursing. 12-year-old Percy was slumped against the passenger door, his sea-green eyes tracing the path of a single raindrop as it zigzagged down the window. He was at that awkward age where his limbs seemed too long for his body, a colt still getting used to its legs. In the back seat, On sat with a stillness that was at odds with the storm raging outside. At 16, he was already a man grown in all the ways that mattered. His shoulders were broad, his frame lean and corded with muscle honed from a discipline Percy couldn't begin to comprehend. His black hair, a shade darker than Percy's, was slicked back from the rain, and his eyes, the same startling sea green as his brother's, held a depth that seemed ancient. They weren't just looking at the storm. They were watching it, analyzing it, as if expecting it to make a mistake. He'd been quiet for the last hour, a coiled spring of tension that only his mother and brother, long accustomed to his moods, could sense. This trip was a ritual, a yearly pilgrimage to a lonely cabin in Montauk, a small pocket of peace in a life that always felt unsettled. For Sally and Percy, it was a cherished escape. For Arian, it was a tactical retreat, a chance to be in a place where the ambient noise of the city didn't constantly interfere with his senses. A place where he could feel the pulse of the sea and almost, for a moment, forget the fire that burned in his soul. He closed his eyes, extending his senses beyond the rattling confines of the car. He could feel the pressure of the storm, the weight of the water in the air, the life force of the trees bending in the wind. But underneath it all, there was something else. A subtle dissonance, a cold thread woven into the fabric of the natural world. It had been there for weeks, a faint hum at the edge of his perception, growing steadily stronger. It felt like being watched by something that had no eyes. "I swear," Sally said, her voice a warm, steady presence against the drumming of the rain, "the weather gets worse every year we do this." She glanced at Percy, a soft smile touching her lips. "You okay back there, Percy? You've been quiet." Percy shrugged, not taking his eyes off the raindrop. "Just tired. The city's loud." He was still smarting from being expelled from Yancey Academy. Another school in a long line of them. He felt like a failure, a screw-up, and the weight of it made him quiet. Arian's gaze flickered to him in the rearview mirror. "He's fine, Mom. Just conserving his energy." Sally's smile widened. She looked at Arian, her expression softening with a profound, almost heartbreaking, love. He had come into her life 4 years before Percy. A mystery left on her doorstep with nothing but a name and eyes that had already seen too much. The world had tried to label him, to diagnose him, to fit him into a box of acronyms and disorders because he was different. He moved with a silent grace that was unnerving, saw things others missed, and possessed an unnerving understanding of the world that no child should have. But Sally had never tried to fix him. She had simply loved him. And in return, he had been the unwavering protector of their small, fragile family. He was the rock against which the waves of their chaotic life broke. "Well, try to conserve a little less," she teased Percy. "We're almost at the cabin. We have a whole weekend of doing absolutely nothing to get through. I even brought extra blue corn chips. And your bro, Thayer has promised not to make you run 5 miles on the beach this time. It's good for his stamina," Arian said, his voice a low rumble. A corner of his mouth twitched upwards, the closest he usually came to a full smile. "Besides, he needs to be able to outrun the stray dogs." Percy groaned. Arian called it self-defense training. It felt more like torture. Since Percy was old enough to walk, Arian had been teaching him not just how to throw a punch, but how to be aware of his surroundings, how to anticipate an opponent's move, how to use his environment to his advantage. The games EY played were grueling drills in disguise. "Find me before I find you." Get the flag from the top of the water tower. Dodge everything I throw at you for 5 minutes. Percy complained, but he always did it. He trusted Arion implicitly. He knew, on some deep, instinctual level, that his brother was preparing him for something important. The cold thread at the edge of Arion's senses suddenly tightened, pulling taut like a tripwire. The pressure in the air intensified, and the natural rhythm of the storm felt corrupted. Twisted. A low rumble shook the car, deeper and more violent than thunder. The vehicle shuddered, and the tires whined on the slick asphalt. Percy sat up straight, his knuckles white on the dashboard. What was that? An earthquake? Arion was already looking past him, out the side window. His eyes narrowed. The feeling of being watched was no longer a subtle hum. It was a physical weight, a malevolent consciousness pressing in on them. Mom, pull over. What? Ari, in this storm. I can barely see the road. Sally's hands tightened on the steering wheel, her own expression suddenly tense. She had learned long ago that when Arion spoke with that tone, it wasn't a suggestion. Now, he said, his voice was calm, but it held an edge of tempered steel that Sally had learned to obey without question. She eased the car onto the muddy shoulder, the tires spinning for a terrifying moment before finding purchase. The engine sputtered and died. What is it? Percy asked, his voice trembling slightly. He looked to Arion for reassurance, as he always did when the world felt a little too big and scary. Arion didn't answer. He was unbuckling his seatbelt, his movements economical and precise. He reached for the long, cloth-wrapped object that was always by his side, resting between him and the car door. It looked like a kendo sword, a practice tool. Percy was the only other person who knew it wasn't wood under the wrappings. Stay in the car. Lock the doors behind me, Arion commanded. Like hell, Percy shot back, his fear momentarily replaced by a surge of indignation. He was tired of being the kid brother who had to be protected. Whatever it is, we face it together. You taught me that. A flicker of pride, quick and fierce, crossed Arion's face. He had spent years training Percy, not just his body, but his will. He had pushed him until he was gasping for breath. Drilled him in awareness and instinct until it was second nature. He had done it to prepare him for a world he prayed Percy would never have to face, a world that Arion knew with chill. Ling's certainty was bleeding into their own. All right, Arion conceded, his hand resting on the hilt of his sheathed blade. But you do exactly what I say. No arguments. Your job is to protect Mom. That's an order. He opened the car door. And the storm roared in, a blast of wind and rain that stole the warmth from the car. Outside, the world was a primal chaos of whipping trees and churning gray sky. A flash of lightning illuminated the road behind them, a strobe of brilliant, cold light. And in that brief, stark whiteness, Percy saw it. A shape, impossibly large, was standing in the middle of the road. It was vaguely humanoid, but its head was too large, its horns cutting jagged silhouettes against the sky. It was a silhouette from his nightmares, from the pages of the mythology books Arion had made him read. It was a monster. Oh, gods, Sally breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. Her face was pale, not with disbelief, but with the horrified recognition of something she had long feared. The thing let out a roar, a guttural, bestial sound that was ripped away by the wind. It was the sound of a predator that had found its prey. It took a step, and the ground trembled. Percy, get Mom to safety, Arion commanded, his voice cutting through the storm's fury. He was already out of the car, the rain plastering his orange t-shirt to his chest. He unwrapped his sword with a flick of his wrists, revealing a blade as dark as a moonless night, a single-edged ninjutsu that seemed to drink the meager light from the sky. There's a hill about 100 yards up the road. A large pine tree at the top. Go there. Don't look back. Arion. No, Sally cried, her voice frantic. She reached for him, but he was already moving away, putting himself between them and the beast. He gave her a look. Just a glance over his shoulder, but it was filled with such fierce, unwavering resolve that her words died in her throat. It was the look he always wore when he stood between them and the world. I'll be right behind you. He lied, and his voice was so confident, so certain, that for a second, Percy almost believed him. Then Percy's training kicked in, the years of Arion's drills overriding his fear. Protect Mom. That's an order. He grabbed his mother's arm. Mom, we have to go. Now, he pulled her from the car, and they plunged into the maelstrom. The mud was slick and treacherous, trying to suck the shoes from their feet. Percy didn't dare look back. He just focused on the pine tree Arion had described, a dark sentinel on the crest of the hill. He could hear the monster's roars, closer now, and the sickening, wet crunch of metal being torn apart. He prayed it wasn't the car. He prayed it wasn't his brother. Arion stood his ground as the creature charged. It was even bigger up close. A mountain of muscle and fur and rage. The Minotaur. He'd read the myths. He'd just never expected them to be so viscerally real, to smell so strongly of blood and wet earth. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent red light, and its snorts sent plumes of steam into the rainy air. It was a creature of pure, unadulterated violence. But Arion had faced worse. He had faced tailed beasts, god-like beings who could shatter mountains with a thought. This was just bigger. He let his chakra flow, a familiar warmth spreading through his limbs, reinforcing his muscles, sharpening his senses. The world slowed down. The drumming of the rain became a series of distinct, individual impacts. He could see every twitch of the Minotaur's muscles, every drop of rain as it hung suspended in the air. He had spent years in this new life suppressing his power, learning to ration it, to hide it. Now, for the first time, he let a little of it loose. The Minotaur lowered its head and charged, its hooves tearing up chunks of asphalt. It expected him to run, to scream, to be another fragile mortal broken by its might. It did not expect him to meet its charge head-on. At the last possible second, Arion dropped into a slide, the chakra on the soles of his feet allowing him to skim across the wet ground as if on ice. He shot under the beast's legs, his dark blade lashing out in a silver arc, slicing through the thick tendon of its right leg. The Minotaur bellowed in pain and fury, its charge faltering as its leg gave out. It stumbled, crashing to the ground with a force that shook the earth. It twisted its massive torso, its huge, clumsy hands trying to grab him, but Arion was already moving, a phantom in the storm. He flowed around its grasping limbs, his blade a blur, leaving Ozan shallow cuts across its back and shoulders. He wasn't trying to kill it yet. He was testing it, learning its movements, its rage. He was also testing the invisible audience. The cold, watching presence intensified, and he could feel its focus narrow on him. It felt amused, an ancient, powerful consciousness, observing his dance of death with the detached curiosity of a scholar watching an insect. The realization sent a chill colder than any rain down his spine. This wasn't a random monster attack. They had been led here. This battle was a performance, and he was the main act. The Minotaur wasn't the true enemy. It was just the weapon. Empowered by this unseen presence, the Minotaur roared and surged to its feet, ignoring the gushing wound in its leg. It was faster now, its movements filled with a desperate, unnatural strength. It swiped at him, its claws like shovels, and Arion was forced to leap back, the wind from the blow tearing at his clothes. This was taking too long. Sai and his mother needed to be further away. He changed his tactics. No more testing. He channeled chakra to his blade, the dark metal humming with unseen energy. The Minotaur charged again, and this time, Arion stood his ground. He held his sword in a two-handed grip, the world narrowing to the space between him and the beast. Just as its horns were about to impale him, he moved, not back, but to the side, a single, fluid step that seemed to defy physics. He pivoted on his heel, bringing his sword down in a devastating overhead strike. The chakra-infused blade met the monster's thick horn, and with a sound like cracking stone, sheared straight through it. The beast screamed, a high-pitched sound of pure agony, and staggered back, clutching the bloody stump where its horn had been. It was his opening, the critical moment he'd been waiting for. But as he prepared for the final blow, a frantic shout cut through the storm. Percy. He was back. Arion's head whipped around, his heart lurching in his chest. His brother was standing halfway down the hill, his face pale with terror, a look of horrified realization dawning on him. He had seen the truth of their world. He had seen the monster. And in his hand, he clutched a pen, a ridiculous, pathetic pen. Then, from the trees behind him, a figure stumbled out. It was Grover, their friend from Yancey Academy, but his legs, they weren't human. They were furry, cloven-hooved, goat legs. The distraction was all the Minotaur needed. It swung a massive, backhanded blow, and Arion, his attention split between the beast and his brother, couldn't dodge in time. The blow caught him in the chest, and the world exploded in a starburst of pain. He felt ribs snap, the air driven from his lungs with a sickening crack. He was thrown through the air like a ragdoll, landing hard on the muddy ground 20 feet away. His sword clattered from his numb fingers. Darkness threatened to take him, but he fought it. He could feel Kurama's chakra, a furious, burning sun in his gut, already working to knit his broken bones and ruptured organs back together. But it would take time. Time he didn't have. Pathetic. A deep, rumbling voice echoed in his mind. You let yourself be distracted by the kit. Shut up. Arion thought back, his consciousness swimming in a sea of pain. Through a haze of agony, he saw the Minotaur turn its attention to Percy. It let out a triumphant roar and began to lumber towards his brother, the one who had caused its pain. No, Arion choked out, trying to push himself up, but his body wouldn't obey. He watched in horror as Percy, seeing his brother fall, did something incredibly brave and stupid. He uncapped the pen, and it sprang into a bronze sword, its celestial bronze blade glowing faintly in the gloom. He stood his ground, a terrified 12-year-old boy with a magic sword, standing between a monster and his family. The Minotaur charged. Percy, remembering years of Arion's relentless drills, watched their feet, not their eyes. Use their momentum against them. Never fight fair. Dodge to the side, a clumsy imitation of his brother's fluid grace. But it was enough. As the beast thundered past, Percy saw his chance. He wasn't strong enough to pierce its hide, but Arion had given him a weapon. He scooped up the jagged, broken horn from the mud. The Minotaur, overshooting its target, turned, ready for another charge. Percy didn't wait. He ran at the beast, leaping onto its back with a surprising agility he didn't know he possessed. He scrambled up its furry spine, holding on for dear life as it thrashed and bucked. He got to its neck and, with a desperate roar of his own, drove the broken horn deep into its side, just below the ribs, putting all his weight behind it. There was a moment of shocked silence, broken only by the howl of the wind. The Minotaur shuddered to a halt, a look of disbelief on its brutish face. It looked down at the horn buried in its side, then back at Percy, who was still clinging to its back. It let out a low, gurgling sound and then dissolved, not into blood and gore, but into a shower of golden dust that was instantly swept away by the storm. Percy slid off the dissolving monster. Landing in the mud, he stood there, panting, covered in slime and monster dust, the bronze sword, now a pen again, in his hand. He had done it. He had killed the Minotaur. Arion finally managed to get to his feet, his body screaming in protest. The worst of the damage was already mending, but the phantom pain was immense. He staggered over to his brother, retrieving his own sword from the mud. He pulled Percy into a fierce, desperate hug. You idiot, he breathed into his hair, his voice rough with pain and relief. A brave, magnificent idiot. He looked up at the hill. Sally was safe, standing near the crest, her hands over her mouth. But Grover was lying on the ground, a deep gash in his leg, his face pale. And the cold, observing presence was still there, a shadow lingering at the edge of his senses. It was no longer amused. It was interested, very interested. Without another word, Arion scooped up the unconscious satyr, slinging him over his shoulder with a grunt of pain. Come on, he grunted to Percy, his voice strained. We're not safe yet. He led the way, his own injuries screaming with every step, but his will was iron. He pushed them onward, up the hill, towards the lone pine tree that marked the border of a place he had only heard whispers of. A place that was supposed to be a sanctuary. They stumbled through an invisible barrier, and the world changed. The storm lessened to a gentle drizzle, the air grew warmer, scented with strawberries. They were in a valley, nestled by Long Island Sound, a collection of Greek-style buildings glowing with a soft, welcoming light in the twilight. Camp Half-Blood. Arion collapsed to his knees just inside the border, gently laying Grover down. His strength finally gave out, the adrenaline, fading to be replaced by a wave of agony and exhaustion. Percy and Sally rushed to his side, their faces etched with worry. He saw figures running towards them from the main building, a large, sky-blue farmhouse. In the lead were a blonde girl with intense, stormy gray eyes that seemed to analyze him in an instant, and a man in a wheelchair who, Orion noted with a detached sense of wonder, had the lower body of a white stallion. He looked at Percy, who was staring at the camp with wide, disbelieving eyes. He had protected him. He had gotten him here. But as he finally let the darkness take him, Orion knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his core, that this was not the end of their struggle. It was just the beginning. And the shadows that watched them were ancient and hungry. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. A Fox Among Wolves. Waking up was a disorienting experience. The first thing Orion registered was the scent of nectar and ambrosia, a cloyingly sweet smell like sun-warmed hone. Wine and toasted bread that seemed to coat the back of his throat. His body felt whole. The ragged, tearing pain in his chest where the Minotaur's fist had connected was gone, replaced by a dull ache that was fading with every breath. He sat up, swinging his legs over the side of the cot, his movements measured and silent. The tattered remains of his clothes were gone, replaced by a simple orange shirt bearing the image of a winged horse and the words, "Camp Half-Blood." He ran a hand over his ribs. No scar, no lingering damage. Kurama's healing, accelerated by the divine food, had left no trace of the monster's fury. "The slop they call ambrosia is surprisingly effective," a deep, rumbling voice echoed in his mind, laced with grudging respect. "It tastes like burnt sugar and regret, but it works." Orion ignored him. The infirmary was a large, airy room with rows of cots, most of them empty. Sunshine streamed through the open windows, carrying the scent of strawberries and the distant, rhythmic sounds of metal striking metal. Percy was asleep in a chair beside his cot, his head lolling at an uncomfortable angle, Riptide still clutched in his hand even in sleep. His face was smudged with dirt, and he looked younger than his 12 years, the bravado of his victory stripped away by exhaustion. A wave of fierce, protective affection washed over Orion. This boy, his brother, had faced down a myth and won. A figure stepped into the doorway, and Orion's senses, always alert, catalogued him instantly. The man from the previous night, Chiron. His tweed jacket was immaculate, his beard neatly trimmed. But his eyes held the weary wisdom of millennia. He was in his wheelchair, a tool of misdirection Orion could appreciate. He could feel the power coiled in the man's lower half, the ancient life force of a being far older than any human. "I am glad to see you are awake," Chiron said, his voice a low, pleasant baritone. He wheeled himself closer. "Your recovery has been remarkable. Most demigods would have been in our care for a week with injuries like those." Orion gave a noncommittal shrug. "I heal fast." He looked pointedly at Percy. "He's the one who should be getting the attention. He's the hero of the hour." Quote. Chiron's eyes softened as he looked at the sleeping boy. "Indeed, he has much of his father in him. A reckless, stubborn bravery." He then turned his gaze back to Orion, and the pleasantries faded. His eyes were sharp, analytical, searching. "And that is the question, isn't it? Who is your father? You fought with a skill I have not seen in centuries. You radiate an energy that is unfamiliar. Yet the sea clearly calls to you, just as it does your brother." Orion had prepared for this. He had spent years crafting a plausible history, a story that bent the truth without breaking it. "My mother met a man before she met Percy's father," he said, his voice even, his gaze steady. "He was a foreigner, a warrior from a land far to the east. He told her High's people were descended from a different pantheon, distant relatives of the gods here. Spirits of the land and sky, not of a single mountain." It was a lie woven from threads of truth. Minato had been a warrior. The shinobi world was, in its own way, a different pantheon. He didn't stay long. Chiron stroked his beard, his expression unreadable. "Interesting. We have always known other pantheons exist. The Egyptian magicians in Brooklyn, the Norse up in Boston. We have had little contact. Your abilities, then, you believe they stem from this Eastern heritage. What else could it be?" Orion deflected, his gaze unwavering. He was walking a tightrope. He needed their trust, their sanctuary for Percy, but he could not reveal the truth. To tell them of chakra, of the Biju, of a world of shinobi, would be to paint a target on their backs so large that even the gods would not miss. Before Chiron could press further, Percy stirred, letting out a groan. His eyes fluttered open, and he sat up with a start. his gaze darting around the room before landing on Arian. "You're okay." Relief washed over his features, so pure and potent it was almost painful to see. "Thanks to you," Arian said, a genuine smile touching his lips. "Nice work with the horn, by the way. Very creative." Percy flushed, a mixture of pride and embarrassment. "You created the opening." Chiron cleared his throat gently. "Now that you are both awake, I believe a tour is in order. And we must find you a place in a cabin. Until you are claimed, you will both stay with the Hermes cabin." The Hermes cabin was, to put it mildly, controlled chaos. It was the most crowded cabin by far, a temporary home for all the unclaimed demigods and the permanent residence of the children of the god of travelers, merchants, and thieves. Campers of all ages were crammed inside, their belongings piled in precarious stacks. The air was thick with the smell of old pizza, sweat, and teenage energy. The cabin counselor, Luke Castellan, greeted them with a friendly, disarming smile. He was handsome, with sandy hair, a mischievous glint in his blue eyes, and a long, pale scar that ran down the side of his face, a jarring note in an otherwise perfect composition. He seemed to embody the effortless charm of his father, yet Arian's senses picked up something else beneath the surface, a layer of bitterness, as cold and hard as steel. Hidden deep beneath the warmth. Luke welcomed them, offered them a sliver of floor space, and made them feel, if not at home, then at least less like outsiders. Percy, eager and a little overwhelmed, was quickly swept up in the whirlwind of camp life. He tried his hand at archery and somehow managed to get the arrow to reverse course and embed itself in the target stand he was shooting from. He struggled with wrestling, got his butt handed to him in foot racing by the wood nymphs, but the moment he picked up a sword, something clicked. The blade felt natural in his hand, an extension of his arm. He wasn't as polished as Luke, but his instincts were flawless. Arian, on the other hand, was an enigma. He moved through the camp with a quiet confidence that drew stares. He didn't participate in most of the scheduled activities, instead choosing to observe from the sidelines, his keen eyes missing nothing. He watched the swordplay at the arena, noting the strengths and weaknesses of the different fighters. He observed the children of Apollo at the archery range, their innate talent a fascinating study in divine genetics. He spent hours in the camp library, a small, dusty room filled with ancient scrolls and leather-bound books, absorbing centuries of Greek mythology and history at a speed that would have been impossible for a normal mortal, even a demigod. He was a predator learning a new jungle, and his silence was more intimidating to the other campers than any boastful display of strength would have been. It was this quiet intensity that brought him to the attention of Clarisse Leroux, daughter of Ares and the camp's resident bully. She and her brutish siblings saw Percy's awkwardness as a weakness to be exploited and Arian's silence as a challenge to their dominance. Their campaign of harassment started small. A misplaced sword here, a tripped foot there, culminating in an attempt to shove Percy's head into a camp toilet. The plumbing, however, had other ideas, and the Ares kids ended up getting blasted by a high-pressure jet of toilet water. Percy was bewildered, but Arian, who had been watching from the doorway, knew exactly what had happened. Percy was his father's son, all right. The breaking point came during a sweltering afternoon at the training arena. Clarisse and two of her brothers had cornered Percy near the armory, their smirking faces promising violence. "Look what we have here," Clarisse sneered, poking Percy in the chest. Her electric spear, the Maimer, crackled ominously in her hand. "It's Percy Jackson, still feeling like a big hero after getting lucky with that cow." Percy stood his ground, his hand inching towards his pocket where Riptide resided. "Leave me alone, Clarisse. Or what, you gonna splash me with toilet water again?" One of her brothers jeered. Arian had been watching from the shadows of the arena entrance. He had let it go on long enough. It was time for a lesson. He stepped out into the sunlight, his expression placid. "He told you to leave him alone." Clarisse turned, her eyes lighting up with savage glee. Well, if it isn't the hero's big, silent brother. Finally decided to join the conversation. "I was beginning to think you were a mute." "I only speak when I have something to say," Arian replied, his voice calm. "And right now, I'm saying you have 5 seconds to find something better to do." Clarisse laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Or what, you gonna stare me to death?" She hefted her spear. I've been itching to see what you've got. Everyone's whispering about how you took a hit from the Minotaur and walked it off. Let's see if you can walk this off. She lunged, not with a simple thrust, but with a complex series of feints designed to intimidate and overwhelm. Arion didn't even draw a weapon. He simply moved. He sidestepped her first thrust, the spearhead hissing past his ear. As the shaft of the spear passed him, his hand shot out, not to grab it, but to gently guide it, using its own momentum to pull her off balance. She stumbled forward, surprised by the lack of resistance. Her two brothers charged from either side. Arion flowed backwards, letting them come to him. The one on the right swung a massive bronze club. Arion dropped, his body sinking below the arc of the swing, and swept the boy's legs out from under him. The boy crashed to the ground. Simultaneously, Arion pivoted on the ball of his foot, his arm extending to clothesline the second brother, who ran face first into the unyielding limb and went down in a heap. Clarice, having recovered her balance, roared in frustration and charged again. This time, Arion met her head-on. He parried her spear thrust with his forearm, the celestial bronze scraping against the hidden bracer under his sleeve. He stepped inside her guard, his palm striking the side of her neck in a precise, nerve-pinching jab. It wasn't a killing blow, not even a knockout blow, just a perfectly applied jolt to her nervous system. Her arm went limp, the maimer clattering to the dusty ground. The whole arena had gone silent. Dozens of campers, drawn by the confrontation, were watching with wide eyes. Arion hadn't thrown a single punch. He had used his opponent's strength, their aggression, their own weapons, against them. He had dismantled the three largest bullies in camp in less than 10 seconds without breaking a sweat. He looked down at Clarice, who was cradling her numb arm, her face a mask of incandescent fury and utter humiliation. "Your father is the god of war, not the god of bullying," Arion said. His voice dropping slightly, losing its dispassionate tone and gaining a hard edge. "War is a discipline. It's about strategy, tactics, understanding your enemy. You fight with rage, and rage makes you sloppy and predictable." He nudged her spear with his foot. A true warrior never lets go of their weapon. He turned and walked away, leaving the three of them sitting in the dirt, surrounded by the stunned silence of the entire camp. He had done more than just defeat them. He had dissected them, analyzed their flaws, and dismissed them as amateurs. He had destroyed their pride, a wound that would sting far longer than any physical blow. As he left the arena, a quiet voice spoke from the side. "That was elegant." He turned. A girl was leaning against a marble column, half hidden in the shadows. She had long, dark hair that seemed to absorb the light and eyes the color of twilight, a shifting shade of purple and gray. She wore the same orange camp shirt as everyone else, but on her, it looked less like a uniform and more like a costume she was reluctantly wearing. There was an aura about her, a subtle shimmer in the air that told Arion she was different. He could feel the energy humming around her, a power that felt like whispers and secrets. This was Selene, daughter of Hecate. He knew of her. The other campers gave her a wide berth. They spoke of her in hushed tones, of the strange things that happened when she was around, of her control over the mist, the very fabric of illusion that separated the mortal world from the world of myth. They feared her power because they didn't understand it. It was efficient, Arion corrected, his gaze assessing her. She didn't flinch from his scrutiny. "You didn't hurt them," she noted, stepping out of the shadows. "You could have, easily. Instead, you taught them a lesson. Pain is a poor teacher. Humiliation is much more effective, especially for the proud." A small, knowing smile touched her lips. "You sound like you speak from experience." Her twilight eyes seemed to see more than just the surface. It was a look he was familiar with, the gaze of someone who spent more time observing than participating. "They say you're a son of the sea. But your energy, it feels different. It's not of the ocean. It's older. It feels like starlight and shadows, life and death, all at once." Orion's internal shields went up, but he kept his expression neutral. "I've been told I'm complicated. I like complicated," Selene said, her smile widening slightly. "It's more interesting than the simple, smash and conquer, philosophy of the Ares cabin." She pushed off the column and started walking away. "I'll see you around, complicated son of the sea." Arion watched her go, a flicker of intrigue stirring within him. In a camp full of demigods who saw him as either a threat or a marvel, she was the first one who had looked at him and seen a puzzle. The Capture the Flag game was a camp tradition, a bi-weekly, full-contact, no-holds-barred war game that pitted cabin against cabin. The alliances were drawn, and as luck would have it, the Hermes cabin, along with Apollo and Hephaestus, were pitted against the Ares cabin, who had allied with Athena, Demeter, and a few of the minor cabins. It was a classic matchup, the brute force and strategic genius of Ares and Athena versus a motley crew of archers, builders, and jacks of all trades. During the planning meeting, Luke laid out a standard strategy. But Arion, listening quietly, saw the flaws. "It's a good plan," Arion said, stepping forward when Luke was finished. "But it's the one Annabeth expects you to use." All heads turned to him. "Annabeth will lead a strong defensive line around their flag at Zeus's fist. She'll use the terrain to her advantage. She'll then send a smaller, faster squadron, led by Clarisse for brute force, on a wide flanking maneuver to hit our flag, counting on us to commit most of our forces to a frontal assault on her position." Luke and the other counselors looked at him, surprised by his quick and accurate assessment. Annabeth Chase, daughter of Athena, was the best strategist in camp, and Arion had just laid out her playbook as if he'd read it. "So, what do you suggest?" Luke asked, his pride clearly pricked but too smart to dismiss the advice. "We do the opposite," Arion said, drawing lines in the dirt with a stick. "We present the illusion of a frontal assault, but it will be a feint. The main force, led by you, Luke, will not attack their flag. It will intercept their flanking squadron here, in the creek bed. It's a natural choke point. While Clarisse's shock troops are bogged down fighting our main force, a smaller, stealthier team will infiltrate their weakened defenses and grab the flag." "Who's on the stealth team?" Percy asked, his eyes wide with excitement. Arion looked at him, then at the two Stoll brothers, Travis and Connor, the most notorious pranksters and thieves in the Hermes cabin. "Us." He then looked over to where Selene was standing by herself, observing the meeting from a distance. "And her." The other campers looked hesitant. Selene rarely participated in the games. Her powers were considered unsportsmanlike. Arion walked over to her. "I need you to create a diversion. A big one. Something to draw the eyes of Annabeth's defenders at the critical moment." Selene looked intrigued. "A diversion? What did you have in mind?" "Something flashy," Arion said, a rare, wolfish grin touching his lips. "Something they can't possibly ignore." The game began with the sound of a conch horn. As Arion had predicted, the Athena and Ares cabins formed a formidable defensive line. Annabeth stood at the center, her gray eyes scanning the woods. Clarisse and her siblings stood at the front, eager for a rematch. Luke led the feint, a loud, chaotic charge that drew the attention of the enemy. The sounds of battle echoed through the forest. As the fight was joined, Arion, Percy, and the Stoll brothers moved like ghosts through the undergrowth, circling wide around the main battle. They crept to the edge of the clearing where the enemy flag, a blood-red banner with a boar's head, was planted. It was guarded by 4 of Annabeth's siblings, their shields interlocked, their spears at the ready. "Now what, boss?" Travis Stoll whispered. Arion just pointed toward the sky on the far side of the clearing. "Wait for it." A moment later, the forest erupted in a dazzling display of light and sound. The trees themselves seemed to twist into shimmering, illusory shapes of great beasts. A spectral griffin made of pure moonlight swooped down over the battlefield, letting out a silent, terrifying roar. The air filled with the scent of unknown spices and the sound of 1,000 whispering voices. It was a masterpiece of misdirection. The Athena campers guarding the flag couldn't help but turn their heads, their mouths agape. It was the opening Arion needed. "Go," he hissed. The Stoll brothers threw smoke bombs. As the guards flinched, Arion and Percy moved. Arion was a blur, a shadow that flowed between 2 guards, his hands striking precise points on their necks. They crumpled without a sound, unconscious. Percy, meanwhile, charged the other 2. A wave of water from the nearby creek rose up, knocking one guard off his feet. The other lunged, but Percy disarmed him with a neat twist of riptide. The flag was theirs, but as Percy grabbed the banner, a hunting horn sounded. Annabeth. She'd realized the trick. She, Clarisse, and a dozen other warriors burst into the clearing. They were cut off. Nowhere to run, Jackson, Clarice snarled, her eyes fixed on Arian. Arian pushed the flag into Percy's hands. Percy, run. Get to the boundary line. Don't stop. But they'll kill you. Percy protested. They'll try, Arian said, drawing a simple celestial bronze sword from the camp armory. He turned to face the oncoming horde, a lone warrior against a dozen. Go. Percy ran. Arian met the charge. He became a whirlwind. He moved through their ranks like water, his sword a blur, disarming, parrying, using the flat of his blade to knock opponents off their feet. He wasn't fighting to kill, he was fighting to delay. He disarmed Clarice for the second time that day. He ducked under a slash from Annabeth, their eyes meeting for a brief, intense moment, a flash of mutual respect. She knew she had been completely outmaneuvered. He bought Percy all the time he needed. Just as the Ares campers were beginning to surround him, a triumphant shout echoed from the creek. Percy had made it across. The game was over. That night, at the campfire, as Luke was recounting their victory, a green light began to glow above Percy's head. The chatter died down. A shimmering, holographic trident, the symbol of the Earthshaker, Poseidon, floated in the air. A collective gasp went through the camp. A child of the Big Three. Chiron's face was grim. Hail, Perseus Jackson, he said, his voice heavy, son of the sea god. But as the campers knelt, a new light began to form, this one above Arian. It was not the calm, green light of the sea. It was a roiling, chaotic energy, a deep, ethereal crimson that seemed to pull the light from the campfire into it. The air grew heavy, thick with a power that felt ancient and terrifyingly wild. The light coalesced, forming the shape of a fox, a spectral beast with 9 long, swaying tails. Its form was made of pure, untamed energy, and its presence sent a primal fear through every demigod present. They could feel its rage, its power, its immense, sorrowful loneliness. Kurama, you drama queen, Arian thought, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features. They needed a demonstration, the voice rumbled in his head. They need to understand that you are not like them. As quickly as it appeared, the crimson fox dissolved. In its place, the same green trident that had appeared over Percy's head solidified, but it was different. It was wreathed in a swirling crimson vortex, like a whirlpool of blood and water. The symbol of Poseidon, yes, but marked with a power that was wilder, more chaotic, more destructive. The camp was utterly silent. No one knelt. No one hailed him. They just stared, their faces a mixture of awe, confusion, and raw, undiluted fear. They had just witnessed something that did not fit into their worldview. Chiron's face was paler than Arian had ever seen it. He looked at Arian not as a lost demigod, but as one would look at a storm on the horizon, a beautiful, terrifying force of nature whose intentions were utterly unknown. Arian met their stares, his sea-green eyes unblinking. He was no longer just the quiet older brother, the skilled fighter, the clever strategist. He was an omen, a fox among wolves. He glanced at Celine. She alone was not looking at him with fear. Her twilight eyes were wide, not with terror, but with a fascinated, burning curiosity. She was not afraid of the puzzle. She wanted to solve it. Somewhere in the shadows of the woods, a tiny, almost invisible piece of advanced technology, a shard of a cloaked drone, pulsed with a faint red light, recording everything. The file, designated, target designation, Arian, was updated with a new threat assessment level, Alpha. The Anti-Deity Task Force had their new primary target. The game had changed. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. Whispers in the Dark. The Poseidon cabin was, for the first time in nearly 70 years, occupied. It was a long, low building made of rough sea stone, studded with pieces of coral and seashell. As if it had been lifted whole from the bottom of the ocean. It smelled of the sea breeze and something ancient, a deep, resonant power that hummed in the very walls. Inside, it was empty. Just 6 empty bunks, a fountain in the center crafted to look like a nereid, and a profound silence. It was a home, but it felt more like a monument. Percy claimed a bunk, throwing his meager belongings onto it. He was a son of Poseidon. The fact was still settling in, a strange mixture of terrifying and exhilarating. He was no longer just Percy Jackson, unclaimed and unwanted. He was someone important, someone feared. Arian chose the bunk opposite him. He didn't unpack. He simply sat, his dark ninjutsu resting against the wall beside him, and began to clean a set of 4 wickedly sharp, 3-pronged kunai he produced from a sealed scroll. The methodical, repetitive motions seemed to center him. He felt the tension in the camp like a physical pressure. Percy was now a celebrity. A child of the Big Three, a violation of an ancient oath. Campers pointed and whispered when he walked by. But Arian was something else. They didn't whisper about him. They fell silent. They gave him a wide berth, their eyes a mixture of fear and a kind of horrified awe. The claiming had branded him not as a hero, but as an anomaly, an omen. The fox and the vortex were a language they didn't understand, and it terrified them. They are right to be afraid, Kurama grumbled from the depths of his mind. They are children playing with bronze toys. They have no concept of true power. And we will keep it that way, Arian replied silently, his fingers never faltering in their task. Their new, isolated reality was cemented a few days later. Percy was summoned to the big house. Arian went with him, an unspoken, non-negotiable fact. They found Chiron, his expression grim, and Mr. D, the surly camp director who was actually the god Dionysus, looking even more bored and irritated than usual. Grover was there too, trotting nervously on his hooves. They sat around a pinnacle table as Chiron laid out the situation. Zeus's master lightning bolt, the symbol of his power, had been stolen. Zeus had accused Poseidon. The summer solstice was in 10 days. If the bolt wasn't returned to Olympus by then, there would be war. A war between the two most powerful gods, a war that would tear the mortal world apart. And Percy, as the only publicly acknowledged son of Poseidon, was the prime suspect and the only one who could possibly undertake a quest to clear his father's name. This is insane, Percy said, his voice cracking. I didn't steal anything. We know, child, Chiron said patiently. But Zeus has a short temper and sees conspiracy in every shadow. You must go to the underworld. You must find the bolt and return it before the solstice. Why the underworld? Arian asked, his voice cutting through the tension. He hadn't spoken a word until now, his focus entirely on the conversation. You think Hades stole it? Chiron sighed. A war between his brothers would weaken them both, leaving him the strongest of the big three. It is the most logical conclusion. Logic is a fool's comfort. Kurama sneered. The one who watches from the dark has a hand in this. I can feel it. This is a game of chaos, not logic. Arian agreed. This had the same scent of manipulation as the Minotaur attack. A simple theft seemed too crude. This was designed to ignite a firestorm. Before Percy could agree, he was told he had to consult the oracle. He went alone into the attic of the big house and returned minutes later, his face pale. He relayed the prophecy he'd been given, his voice trembling slightly. You shall go west and face the god who has turned. You shall find what was stolen and see it safely returned. You shall be betrayed by one who calls you a friend. And a storm of two souls shall fail or transcend. You shall fail to save what matters most in the end. The room was silent. Chiron's face was etched with worry. A storm of two souls, he murmured, his eyes flicking between Percy and Arian. I'll do it, Percy said, his voice firmer now. He had a quest, a purpose. I'll get the bolt back. You are allowed 2 companions, Chiron said. Choose wisely. Grover, Percy said immediately. The satyr looked terrified but nodded bravely. He's been my protector. I want him with me. Quote. For his second, he hesitated, looking at Arian. But before he could speak, a voice came from the doorway. I'm coming with you. Annabeth Chase stood there, her blonde hair pulled back, her stormy gray eyes filled with a fierce determination. She had her bronze knife strapped to her arm and a Yankees cap, her cap of invisibility, tucked into her pocket. You need a strategist on this quest. Percy Jackson. You're brave, but you're not smart enough to do this alone. Percy bristled, but Chiron nodded. A wise choice. Wait, Percy said. I want Arian, too. The prophecy allows for only 2 companions, Mr. D said, looking up from his Diet Coke with disinterest. No, Arian stated, his voice flat and absolute. I'm going. That is not negotiable. The rules, Annabeth began. But Chiron held up a hand. The prophecy spoke of a storm of 2 souls. I believe it refers to the 2 of you. Chiron looked at Arian, his ancient eyes searching. He Here are forces at play here we do not understand. Your unique talents, Arian, may be necessary. Annabeth looked outraged. A quest with 3 companions was unheard of. And one of them was the silent, terrifying enigma who had embarrassed her entire cabin. But she held her tongue, her jaw tight with resentment. The quest was set. Luke met them at the camp's border, Talia's pine tree. He gave Percy a pair of winged sneakers. A gift from their father Hermes. He wished them all luck, clapping Percy on the shoulder. As he did, Arian's eyes narrowed. He could sense it again, that subtle, cold bitterness clinging to Luke like a shroud, and beneath it, something else. A faint, almost imperceptible trace of an ancient power that felt like grinding stone and wasted time. It was the scent of Kronos. Arian said nothing, but he filed the information away. Every shinobi was a spy first and a warrior second. Their journey began on a Greyhound bus heading west. The air was stale, and the hours crawled by. Annabeth and Percy bickered, their personalities clashing like oil and water. Grover chewed nervously on a piece of tin can. Arian sat by the window, seemingly asleep, but his senses were stretched taut, scanning their surroundings for miles in every direction. He felt the familiar cold thread of the watching presence from the storm, but it was distant, passive. More immediate was a D.F.F. errant kind of threat he had sensed gathering since they left Manhattan. It was foul and ancient, a scent of sulfur and rot. It came to a head at the back of the bus. 3 old ladies, their faces like wrinkled parchment and their knitting needles clicking ominously, began to stare at them. Arian's eyes snapped open. "Problem," he said, his voice low. Percy and Annabeth looked back. One of the old ladies, Mrs. Dodds from Yancey Academy, Electo, the Fury, smiled a lipless, vicious grin. "We have found you, Perseus Jackson." All 3 women began to transform, their bodies elongating, their features becoming harsh and monstrous. Leathery wings sprouted from their backs, and their knitting needles morphed into fiery whips. Chaos erupted on the bus. The mortal passengers screamed, their men.ds unable to process what they were seeing through the mist. The bus driver swerved, sending them crashing into the side of the Lincoln Tunnel. "Get the mortals off the bus!" Arian yelled at Grover. He was already moving, his dark blade in his hand. Annabeth drew her knife, Percy uncapped Riptide. The Furies descended on them. Annabeth was a whirlwind of practiced, defensive moves, her knife a blur. Percy fought with wild, instinctual grace, the sea's power flowing through him. But they were outnumbered. Arian didn't fight like them. He was a creature of brutal efficiency. While Percy engaged Electo, Arian moved on the other 2. He sidestepped a whip, the fiery lash cracking inches from his face, and drove the pommel of his sword into the Fury's temple. The creature screeched and stumbled back. He didn't give it time to recover. He kicked the back of its knee, forcing it to the ground, and brought the flat of his blade down on the back of its neck. There was a sickening crunch, and the Fury dissolved into golden dust. He spun just as the 3rd one lunged. He didn't meet her charge. He dropped low, his leg sweeping out, hooking her ankle and sending her sprawling into a row of seats. Before she could rise, he was on her, his blade at her throat. "Who sent you?" he snarled, his voice a low growl that was more terrifying than any shout. The Fury hissed, baring her fangs. He pressed the blade harder. "Hades, the Lord of the Dead wants you all," she rasped. "Liar," Arian said. He could sense the lie, the layer of deceit. Hades wanted the bolt, yes, but this felt different. This felt like a test. A proclamation. He ended it. The 3rd Fury dissolved. Percy, with Annabeth's help, finally managed to land a solid blow on Electo, who shrieked and flew out of the shattered bus window. Retreating into the storm, they stood in the wreckage, panting. "How did you?" Annabeth started, staring at the 2 piles of golden dust. She had been trained to fight monsters her whole life. She had never seen anyone dismantle 2 of them so quickly, so clinically. "They were off balance," was all Arian said. They fled the tunnel, the sirens of mortal police growing closer. They were fugitives now, wanted for causing a bus crash. They spent the night moving through the wet woods of New Jersey, the rain washing away their scent. Annabeth was quiet, watching Arian with a new, wary suspicion. It was close to midnight when Arian held up a hand, bringing them to a silent halt. "What is it?" Percy whispered. More monsters. No, Orion said, his head cocked, his eyes scanning the darkness. Something else. He couldn't smell them. He couldn't hear them. There was no life force to sense. There was just the faint, almost sub-audible hum of high-frequency electronics. And the subtle feeling of being watched by cameras, not eyes. The attack was sudden and silent. A shimmering net, crackling with blue energy, dropped from the trees, aimed at Percy. Orion tackled his brother, pushing them both clear just as the net hit the ground, burning a perfect grid into the wet leaves. From the darkness, figures emerged. They were human, clad in matte black tactical gear, their faces hidden by full-face helmets. They moved with the disciplined precision of soldiers, and they carried weapons that glowed with a sick, technological light. A high-frequency whine filled the air, and Percy staggered. Clutching his head, his connection to the sea, his demigod senses, felt scrambled, muted. Annabeth cried out, her own focus shattered. A localized dampening field. ADTF. One of the soldiers barked. Targets are live. Subdue. Do not terminate. Capture the alpha target at all costs. Their weapons pointed not just at Percy, but at Orion. Annabeth and Percy were disoriented, on the defensive. These weren't monsters. Their training hadn't prepared them for this. Orion, however, felt his own power, his chakra, flare unimpeded. This enemy, he understood. This was a battle he knew how to fight. Percy. The stream, 30 yards to your left. Orion commanded, his voice cutting through the sonic assault. Find their power source, short it out. Annabeth. Diversion. Far right flank. Draw their fire. His orders were so sharp, so confident, they obeyed without thinking. Annabeth, using her cap, vanished and threw a rock into the trees on the far side of the clearing. Several soldiers turned, firing pulses of energy that exploded against the trees. Percy, shaking his head to clear it, scrambled toward the sound of running water. That left 4 soldiers focused on Orion. He met their advance not with a charge, but by fading back into the shadows. For a moment, he was there, and then he was gone. The soldiers advanced in a diamond formation, their weapons scanning the darkness. One of them passed a thick oak tree. A hand shot out from the shadows, grabbing the soldier's helmet and slamming it into the trunk with brutal force. The soldier dropped without a sound. Orion was already moving, a blur of motion. He vaulted over a fallen log, landing behind a second soldier and driving his knee into the back of his leg, snapping it with an audible crack. He disarmed the man as he fell, dismantling the strange energy rifle with a few deft twists. They are well trained, Kurama noted with clinical detachment. But they are only human. A pulse of energy shot past Orion's head, singing the air. The remaining 2 soldiers had him bracketed. He didn't retreat. He charged. He ran straight at them, his dark blade a mere streak in the moonlight. He wasn't aiming to kill. He was aiming to dismantle. His sword became a tool, severing power cables on their armor, shattering the lenses of their helmets, destroying their weapons. In seconds, the last 2 soldiers were disarmed and disabled. One with a dislocated shoulder, the other with a series of nerve strikes that left him paralyzed on the forest floor. Just as he finished, a loud crackle and a flash of light came from the direction of the stream. Percy had found the generator. The high-frequency whine died. Orion stood over the last soldier, the tip of his blade at the man's throat. He reached down and ripped the helmet off. The man inside was young, his face pale with shock and terror. Orion leaned in close. "Who sent you?" he asked, his voice dangerously soft. The soldier just stared, his eyes wide with fear. Orion saw a small, blinking light on the side of the man's helmet, still lying on the ground. A data recorder. With a flick of his wrist, he used a kunai to pry a small data chip from a port in the helmet. Pocketing it before anyone could see, he knocked the soldier unconscious and rose to his feet. Percy, Annabeth, and Grover were staring at him. They hadn't seen the whole fight. Just glimpses of a shadowy figure moving with impossible speed, a force of precise, calculated violence that was utterly inhuman. They had seen him fight monsters. This was different. This was the first time they had seen the shinobi. Annabeth found her voice first, her gray eyes wide with suspicion and a hint of fear. "What was that? Who were they? And how did you fight like that?" Orion looked at the disabled soldiers, then back at his companions. The trust between them, already fragile, had just been shattered. Percy was looking at him with confusion, torn between loyalty to his brother and Annabeth's valid questions. Arian's expression was cold, pragmatic. They are a threat. I dealt with it. That's all you need to know right now. He turned and began walking west, leaving them standing in the dark. Silent forest. The wreckage of the bus still smoked miles behind them, a monument to their first battle. But the whispers in the dark were no longer just from monsters or distant gods. They were here, now, in the space between them. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. A Garden of Stone. The tension in the days that followed the ADTF attack was a palpable thing, a fourth companion on their quest. They moved through the wilderness, avoiding roads and towns, living off what Grover could scavenge and the high-energy ration bars Arian produced from one of his many scrolls. Annabeth's suspicion had sharpened into a brittle, wary watchfulness. She observed Arian's every move, trying to deconstruct his fighting style, to understand the impossible speed and precision. It fit no known demigod paradigm. It was alien. Percy was caught in the middle, his loyalty to his brother warring with Annabeth's cold logic. He had seen what Arian could do, and while part of him was in awe, another smaller part was unnerved. Arian, for his part, had withdrawn even further. During the day, he was the silent, efficient vanguard, scouting ahead, securing their path. At night, while the others slept, he sat watch. His focus turned inward. He worked on the data chip he'd stolen, using a trickle of lightning-natured chakra to interface with the device, painstakingly breaking through layers of military-grade encryption. What he found confirmed his worst fears. The Anti-Deity Task Force was a global, clandestine organization with government-level funding. They had files on hundreds of demigods, satyrs, and nymphs. They had detailed analyses of Camp Half-Blood's defenses. And they had a file on him. It was thicker than any other, filled with satellite imagery, witness reports from his various expulsions, and disturbingly accurate threat assessments. They had designated him Target Alpha. Their primary objective wasn't Percy or the Bolt, it was him. To capture, contain, and study. The chip also contained tracking protocols. They weren't just hunting them, they were following a signal. He found it. A microscopic transponder embedded in the sole of the winged sneakers Luke had given Percy. A betrayal confirmed. He crushed the chip in his fist, reducing it to dust. He would deal with the transponder, and with Luke, later. Right now, they needed to disappear. They were somewhere in the woodlands of Pennsylvania, cold, miserable, and running low on supplies, when Grover stopped dead, sniffing the air. I smell food, he bleated. Like real food. Burgers. Fries. You also smell monsters. Arian stated flatly, his own senses picking up a faint, cloying scent beneath the greasy aroma of a grill. It smelled of ancient stone and venom, a smell that resonated with deep, primal warnings. Yeah, that too, Grover admitted nervously. But also, burgers. Through the trees, they could see a low, brightly lit building. A neon sign flickered, reading, Auntie M's Garden Gnome Emporium. The place was an island of garish light in the vast, dark woods, surrounded by a bizarre collection of stone statues. Lifelike statues of terrified satyrs, startled mortals, and even a minotaur. Frozen mid-roar. It's a trap, Annabeth said immediately, her hand on her knife. Probably, Percy agreed, though his stomach rumbled in protest. He was tired of being hunted, tired of ration bars. He looked at Arian, expecting him to make the final call, to order them away. Arian's gaze was fixed on the Emporium, a muscle twitching in his jaw. His senses were screaming at him. The coldness emanating from that building was not the raw fury of a monster like the Minotaur. It was a cold, patient, and deeply bitter presence. And woven through it, almost too faint to detect, was that now familiar thread of primordial darkness. The touch of his unseen audience. We need to rest. We need real food, Percy argued, his frustration boiling over. We can't just run forever. We're supposed to be heroes. Right. If there's a monster, we fight it. It was a challenge, a declaration of independence aimed as much at Arian as at the situation. Annabeth, surprisingly, backed him up. He's right. We can't show fear. We scout it out. We have a plan, and we handle it. Her pride as a daughter of Athena wouldn't let her back down from a challenge, especially not in front of Arion. Arion looked from his brother's defiant face to Annabeth's determined one. He could force them to leave, but it would break the fragile trust they had left. Sometimes, the best way to teach a lesson was to let people walk into the trap they couldn't see, and be there to pull them out. Fine, he said, his voice clipped. But we do this my way. No one eats anything, no one drinks anything, and you stay within my line of sight at all times. The moment I say we leave, we leave. No questions. They agreed, and the four of them walked out of the woods and into the gravel parking lot. The woman who greeted them at the door was tall and wore a black dress that covered her from neck to ankles. A veil of the same black cloth obscured her face. She moved with a strange, gliding grace. "Welcome, children," she said, her voice a low, sibilant hiss. "You look so tired. Please, come in, rest, have a burger, on the house." The inside was a bizarre mix of a diner and a showroom. Booths lined one wall, while the rest of the space was crowded with more of the frighteningly realistic stone statues. The woman, who introduced herself as Auntie M, gestured for them to sit. Despite Arion's warning, the smell of the food was overwhelming. She brought them trays laden with cheeseburgers, fries, and milkshakes. "I don't get many visitors out here," she said, her veiled face turned towards Percy and Arion. "Especially not ones who smell so strongly of the sea. It has been a long time since I had company from that family." There was a world of venom in that last word. Percy and Annabeth exchanged uneasy glances. Grover was trying to make himself as small as possible, nibbling on a wax paper wrapper. Arion didn't touch his food. He sat with his back to the wall, his dark blade resting beside him on the booth seat. His eyes were not on Auntie M, but on the polished surface of a chrome napkin dispenser, watching her reflection. "You have your father's eyes," Auntie M hissed, focusing on Percy. "He was a handsome god. But handsome is as handsome does, isn't that right? Some promises, when broken, can curdle a heart for eternity." She then turned her veiled gaze to Arion. "But you are different. The sea is on you, but there is something else. Something older. A power that does not belong to those arrogant fools on their mountain. I can feel it. It's a lonely power, isn't it, child?" Arion's gaze met her reflection. He didn't reply. She laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Oh, yes, the silence of the outcast. I know it well." She tried to separate them, offering Percy and Annabeth a tour of her studio in the back, but Arion's cold, unblinking stare kept them rooted to their seats. Frustrated, she changed tactics. "Tell me, child of the shadows," she said to Arion. "Do you not tire of protecting those who fear you? Of hiding what you are? There is a new age dawning. A quiet, peaceful age of darkness where the outcasts, the monsters, will no longer have to hide. A great and ancient power is stirring, one who understands bitterness. One who understands betrayal. He offers a world where we can be what we are, without shame." The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to deepen at her words, writhing like living things. Erebus. She was one of his pawns, her ancient grudge a fertile ground for his corruption. "Let me see your face," Arion said, his voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable command. Auntie M stiffened. "It is not a sight for a child's eyes." "You are Medusa," Annabeth breathed, her face going pale as all the pieces clicked into place. The statues, the name, the veiled face. Percy and Grover froze, their food forgotten. Medusa laughed again, the sound now filled with triumph. "Clever girl." She reached up with a withered hand. "I was once beautiful, you know, before your mother's patron, the sea god, defiled me in Athena's temple. And what did the virgin goddess do? Did she punish the mighty Poseidon? No, she punished me, she cursed me. This is the justice of the gods." She ripped the veil away. Her face was a horrifying mask of rage and bitterness, but it was her hair that drew the eye, a writhing, hissing nest of green snakes. Her eyes glowed with a sickly, phosphorescent light. "Look at me, children," she shrieked. "Don't." Annabeth screamed, throwing herself under the table and covering her eyes. Grover did the same. Percy instinctively looked away, fumbling for his sword. But Arion didn't flinch. He didn't look at her, but at her reflection in the polished steel of his blade, which he'd raised to eye level. He could see her every move without meeting her deadly gaze. His shinobi training, hours spent fighting blindfolded, relying on sound and sensation, had prepared him for this. Your fight is with Poseidon, not with his sons, Arion said, his voice steady. His sons will pay for his sins. Medusa lunged, not at Percy, but at Arion. She saw him as the true threat, the true prize. If she could add this strange, powerful soul to her collection, her new master would be pleased. Arion moved, a fluid motion that took him from the booth to the center of the room in a single bound. Percy, the statues. Use them for cover. Annabeth, your cap. Create a distraction. He commanded, his mind already 3 steps ahead. The fight was a deadly dance in a room full of mirrors and obstacles. Percy, using a reflective tray from the table, moved cautiously, trying to get behind her. Annabeth, invisible, began knocking over statues, the sound drawing Medusa's attention, disorienting her. Medusa was fast, her snake hair striking like whips, her gaze a constant, lethal threat. But Arion was faster. He moved like a phantom, never staying in one place, using the environment to his advantage. He would appear in the reflection of a glass case, draw her attack, and then vanish, only to reappear on the other side of the room. He was hurting her, controlling the flow of the battle, forcing her into a position of his choosing. You cannot hide from me forever, little shadow. She snarled, growing more and more frustrated by his refusal to meet her head-on. I'm not hiding, Arion's vow. Ice echoed from behind a large statue of a terrified mailman. I'm winning. He kicked the base of the statue, sending it toppling towards her. She dodged, hissing in fury, and found herself facing the back wall. A wall covered in polished, decorative shields. Percy, seeing the opening Arion had created, yelled, "Hey, snake lady!" Medusa spun around, her eyes blazing, ready to turn the boy to stone. It was the moment Arion had been waiting for. With a burst of chakra-fueled speed, he appeared directly in front of her, his back to her, his dark ninjutsu held up before his face. The blade was polished to a perfect, mirror-like sheen. She saw not him, but her own reflection. Her own monstrous face, her own glowing eyes, her own nest of serpents. For a single, horrifying instant, she saw the curse as the gods had intended it. And in that instant, she turned herself to stone. Her body froze, her triumphant snarl hardening into a permanent, silent scream, and then she crumbled into a heap of gray dust and desiccated snakes. Silence descended on the Emporium, broken only by the ragged breaths of Percy and Grover. Annabeth reappeared, her face pale. They had survived. The victory was grim. Percy was shaken, realizing how close they had come to becoming part of the garden collection. Annabeth looked at Arion, her expression a complex mixture of gratitude, awe, and deep-seated unease. He had controlled the entire fight, manipulated them all like pieces on a board, and executed his plan with a ruthless precision that was terrifying. How did you know to do that? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Every weapon has a weakness, Arion replied, calmly wiping his blade clean. Hers was vanity. He knelt and, using a spare bag, began to pack Medusa's head. What are you doing? Percy yelped, disgusted. A spoil of war, Arion said. The gaze still works. It might be useful. He sealed the bag, and the faint, cold aura of the Gorgon's power was contained. He looked at his companions. Their faces pale in the garish diner light. They had worked as a team, followed his orders. It was a start. He decided to give them something, a small piece of the truth to bridge the chasm of his secrecy. Annabeth, you were right to be suspicious of Luke's gift, he said, pulling the winged sneakers from Percy's bag. With a precise flick of a kunai, he pried a tiny, metallic disc from the heel of one shoe. We're being tracked, not just by monsters, by a mortal organization, the soldiers in the woods. They're called the ADTF. He crushed the transponder under his boot. Annabeth's eyes widened. She had suspected Luke's loyalty was complicated. This was the first piece of concrete proof. She looked at Arion, a new understanding dawning. He wasn't just secretive, he was fighting a war on a different front than the rest of them, a front they hadn't even known existed. We need to get off the grid, Arion continued, his voice taking on the tone of command once more. No more buses. From now on, we travel by train. It's harder to track a single car among hundreds. He led them out of the Emporium, leaving the dusty remains of Medusa behind. They walked back into the darkness. But the dynamic had shifted. Percy was quieter, more thoughtful, the reality of their quest setting in. Annabeth was still suspicious, but her suspicion was now tinged with a grudging respect. And Arion walked ahead of them all, a silent, solitary guardian, carrying the head of a monster and the weight of secrets that were far heavier. They were no longer just demigods on a quest. They were fugitives, hunted by gods. Monsters, and now, mortals. And the farther west they went, the deeper the shadows grew. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Devil's Crossroads. The freight train rattled across the heartland. A rhythmic beat against the steel tracks that did little to soothe the tension within the boxcar they called home. They were a small, tightly wound knot of fugitives, moving under the cloak of mundane transport. Annabeth spent her time poring over a map, her brow furrowed in concentration, planning their route with a strategist's precision. Percy practiced with Riptide, the sword pen becoming a more natural extension of his arm with each passing day. Grover played sad, hopeful tunes on his reed pipes that made the circus animals in the neighboring cars restless. And Arion watched. He sat in the shadows of the boxcar, a still point in their moving world, and he watched them all. He watched the miles of American landscape blur past, his senses sifting through the noise, searching for threats. The primordial darkness of Erebus was a constant, a cold pressure on the horizon, but it was distant. The more immediate threat, the ADTF, was a ghost. After he had destroyed the transponder, their trail had gone cold, but Arion knew it was temporary. An organization that efficient, that well-equipped, wouldn't give up. They were regrouping, reassessing, hunting him. His analysis of the data chip had given him a crucial piece of insight. The ADTF used technology to track divine energy signatures. Percy, Annabeth, Grover, they shone like beacons in the ADTF's sensors. He, however, was a blind spot. Chakra was not divine energy. It was a fusion of the spiritual and the physical, a power native to a different reality's laws. They could only track him through association. By following the divine lights of his companions. He was a shadow hiding behind their fire. They arrived in St. Louis under a sky the color of a bruised plum, the air thick with the promise of a thunderstorm. They were broke, hungry, and the deadline of the summer solstice was a weight that grew heavier with each sunset. The gateway arch, Annabeth said, her eyes alight with an archet. Actual reverence that momentarily eclipsed her weariness. It's a monument to Athena. It's 63 stories high. I have to see it. A giant, highly visible metal target in the middle of a city. Arion countered, his voice flat. He could already feel it. A convergence. A foul, unnatural scent of sulfur and venom coiled at the base of the arch like a serpent, and woven through it was the faint, sterile hum of sophisticated electronics. Both his hunters were waiting for him. Bad idea. We're not going to be ruled by fear, Arion, Annabeth shot back, her pride stung. It's a monument to my mother. It should be safe for me. It's a sign. Signs get people killed, Arion said. I'm with Annabeth, Percy said, stepping forward. He was tired of running, tired of hiding in the shadows his brother created. What's the point of being a demigod if we have to live like rats? We go up, we see the city, and we prove we're not scared. Arion looked at their defiant faces. He recognized is for what it was, a necessary rebellion. He had pushed them, controlled their every move since the quest began, all to keep them safe. But he was forging them into weapons, and weapons had to be tested. He could see no way to avoid the coming confrontation. Better to face it on ground he had at least seen, than to be ambushed in a dark alley. Fine, he conceded, his voice hard. We go up. Grover, you stay here. Your scent will only agitate what's waiting for us. If we're not back in an hour, you run. Understand? Grover nodded, looking miserable. Arion, Percy, and a reluctant Annabeth joined the line of tourists. Stepping into the cramped, futuristic elevator pod that would carry them to the top. As the doors closed, Arion rested a hand against the wall, feeding a tiny, almost imperceptible pulse of chakra into the structure. He mapped the interior, the stress points, the exits. He was preparing the battlefield. The view from the top was breathtaking, a panoramic sweep of the city and the great muddy slash of the Mississippi River. But Arian wasn't looking at the view. He was watching the other occupants of the observation deck. A portly woman with a yapping chihuahua in her purse. A nervous-looking security guard. A family with 2 young children. It was the woman with the dog who made the first move. "You know," she said, her voice changing, becoming rough and reptilian. "It's rude to bring your own weapons into a national monument, son of the sea god." The chihuahua yapped, and its bark deepened into a lion's roar. It leapt from her purse, its body swelling, twisting, growing into the monstrous form of the chimera. It had the head of a lion, the body of a goat, and a long, diamond-headed serpent for a tail. The woman herself seemed to grow, her features becoming scaly and forked-tongued. Echidna, the mother of monsters. The mortal tourists screamed, but their forms flickered and dissolved. Illusions. All of them. Only the security guard remained, and he was fumbling not for a gun, but for a strange, metallic baton. "Now, my pet," Echidna hissed, a little appetizer before the main course. The chimera lunged, not at Percy, but at Annabeth. But before it could reach her, the world outside the windows erupted in a flash of silent, blue light. A high-tech harpoon, trailing a crackling energy cable, shot up from the ground and slammed into the chimera's flank. The beast roared in pain and fury, thrashing against the cable that was now trying to reel it in. Simultaneously, a high-frequency whine filled the air, and the lights inside the arch flickered. Percy and Annabeth staggered, clutching their heads, their divine senses scrambled by a dampening field. "ADTF Strike Team Alpha, engage." A voice crackled from the security guard's baton. "Capture target Alpha, subdue the others." The guard wasn't a guard. He was an ADTF operative. The situation devolved into pure chaos. A 3-way battle in a steel cage 600 feet in the air. "Annabeth, the operative," Arian commanded, his voice cutting through the sonic assault. "Percy, the serpent's tail is its weak point." Echidna, enraged that her divine hunt had been interrupted by mortals, ignored the demigods and began tearing at the harpoon cable with her claws. The chimera, thrashing wildly, breathed a jet of fire that blew out a section of the observation windows, the wind howling through the breach. It then whipped its serpent tail around, the venomous snakehead striking Percy in the leg. Percy cried out, stumbling back, a dark, ugly wound already sizzling on his calf. He looked down at his leg, then out through the hole in the window at the Mississippi River far below. He made a choice. With a desperate yell, he threw himself out of the opening. "Percy!" Annabeth screamed in horror, but Arian had seen the desperate logic in his brother's eyes. "Trust the water." That left Arian, Annabeth, Echidna, and the chimera trapped with the ADTF. The operative drew an energy pistol, but Annabeth, recovering her wits, charged him, her bronze knife a blur. She fought with a desperate ferocity, keeping him occupied. Arian's focus was on the 2 monsters, and on the new threats emerging. 2 more ADTF soldiers in full tactical gear rappelled up the side of the arch, their magnetic boots clanking against the steel. They entered through the breach, their energy rifles aimed directly at Arian. "Target Alpha is isolated," one of them said, his voice a synthesized rasp. "Deploy containment field." Arian didn't give them the chance. He moved. He snatched a Suvan IR snow globe from a nearby display and threw it. Not at the soldiers, but at the chimera's lion head. The globe shattered against its snout. It was a pathetic attack, but it was insulting. The enraged D-Beast turned its fury on the nearest target, one of the ADTF soldiers. It lunged, its claws tearing through the soldier's advanced armor like tinfoil. "Hold your fire," the other soldier yelled, but it was too late. His comrade was thrown against the far wall, a broken heap. Echidna screeched in frustration. "These mortal insects are ruining my hunt." Arian used the chaos. He slid under a swipe from the chimera, his dark blade lashing out and severing the harpoon cable. Freed, the beast roared, turning its attention back to him. He was now between the monster and the remaining ADTF soldier. The soldier raised his rifle. Arian didn't try to dodge. He simply dropped to the ground. The pulse of energy shot over his head and slammed into the chimera's chest. The monster howled in pain. It had been hurt by gods and heroes. To be wounded by a mortal's toy was the ultimate indignity. It lunged at the soldier, and the observation deck became a whirlwind of fire, claws, and panicked energy blasts. Suddenly, a new presence flooded the room. It was hot, loud, and reeked of bloodlust and leather. A Harley-Davidson motorcycle materialized in the middle of the observation deck, its engine roaring like a dragon. Astride it was a man in a black leather duster, his face handsome but cruel, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses that burned with an inner fire. Ares, the god of war. Now this, he said, a savage grin spreading across his face, is a party. His sheer presence was overwhelming. Echidna and the Chimera backed away, hissing. The ADTF operative, his fight with Annabeth forgotten, stared in shock. His instruments going haywire in the face of a raw, divine power signature. Olympian-level entity detected. He stammered into his comms. Repeat. Olympian Lev. Ares flicked his wrist, and the operative's energy pistol melted into a slag of useless metal. Retreat. A new, calmer voice ordered over the comms. Thorn. The ADTF commander was cutting his losses. The Oper. Ativ and the remaining soldier fired grappling lines and rappelled back down the arch, vanishing into the storm clouds. Echidna, recognizing a battle she could not win, snarled a curse and followed her pet out of the hole in the window. Leaping into the abyss. Silence. Ares swung his leg off the bike, the engine noise dying. He took off his glasses, and Orion saw that his eyes were empty sockets containing miniature nuclear explosions. Not bad, kid, Ares said, his burning gaze fixed on Orion. He had been watching the whole fight. You fight dirty. You use your head. I like that. He looked at Annabeth, then at the hole Percy had jumped through. Got some guts, the three of you. Just then, a sopping wet Percy climbed back through the hole, looking completely unharmed, his eyes wide with a newfound power. He had been healed by the river. Ares laughed. Like a cockroach, this one. He then got down to business. So, Zeus thinks you stole his bolt. My dad thinks you stole his helmet. And you've got some high-tech mortals chasing you. You're in a world of trouble. He offered them a deal. His shield was at a nearby water park. He'd left it there on a date. If they retrieved it for him, he'd give them a ride west and some information. It was a blatant trap, but they had no choice. They found themselves at a decaying, abandoned water park. The shield was in the center of a ride called the Tunnel of Love, a long, dark tunnel filled with cobwebs and mechanical cupids. Hephaestus, Annabeth breathed. This is a trap he set for Ares and Aphrodite. Percy and Annabeth go in one of the boats to retrieve the shield. Orion stayed on the platform, his senses on high alert. He could feel the mechanisms under the floor, the pressure plates, the tripwires. The moment Percy's hand touched the shield, the trap sprang, gates slammed down, and the tunnel began to fill with water. The mechanical cupids activated, their bows armed with tiny, sharp arrows. And from a hidden network of pipes, thousands of metallic spiders, automatons, began to pour into the tunnel, their pincers clicking. Annabeth screamed, her arachnophobia paralyzing her. Percy, the water. Orion yelled, push it back. Buy me time. Percy, focusing his will, held the water at bay, creating a pocket of air around their boat. Orion, meanwhile, didn't try to break the gate. He pinpointed the control mechanisms with his chakra. He punched the wall of the ride, not with brute force, but with a precise, vibrating palm strike of chakra. The shockwave traveled through the structure, shattering a series of gears deep within the walls. The automatons froze, their power cut. With another targeted strike, he broke the lock on the gate. They emerged, shaken but with the shield. Ares was waiting, looking pleased. He gave them a ride in the back of a semi-truck carrying live, miserable-looking animals. As promised, he gave them information. He told Percy his mother was alive, a hostage in the underworld. But as the truck prepared to leave, Ares pulled Orion aside. The god's fiery eyes scanned him, not as a demigod, but as a warrior. That thing inside you, Ares said, his voice a low growl. The fox. I can feel its rage. It sings a song I like. He grinned. In the war that's coming, kid, and it is coming, there are no sides. Not really. There's just the people who get crushed, and the people who do the crushing. You've got the heart of a crusher. Don't let anyone, not Zeus, not your old man, not even your little brother, turn you into a pawn. He clapped Arian on the shoulder, a gesture of respect from one god of conflict to another. Then he was gone. Arian climbed into the back of the truck as it rumbled onto the highway, heading west once more. The air stank of unwashed sheep, but for the first time, there was a strange clarity. The lines of the battlefield were becoming clearer. He wasn't just Percy's protector. He was a player in a much larger game, a game that the god of war himself had just acknowledged. And he had no intention of being a pawn. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Gilded Cage. Las Vegas rose out of the desert like a fever dream, a jagged skyline of impossible architecture shimmering in the heat. They arrived in the back of the animal transport truck, smelling faintly of sheep and despair. They were fugitives with no money, 4 days left until the solstice, and a growing certainty that the entire world was conspiring against them. The city was an assault on the senses, a cacophony of noise, a riot of neon, a crushing press of humanity. It was the perfect place to get lost. It was also the perfect place to be ambushed. Arian felt the city's energy like 1,000 grating frequencies, but underneath it all, one signal pulsed with a strange, seductive harmony. It was a place of immense power, but it wasn't aggressive. It was passive, welcoming. It was a Venus flytrap, sweet and inviting, patiently waiting for its prey to wander in. They were staggering down the strip, weary and defeated, when they saw it. The Lotus Hotel and Casino. The entrance was a giant, glowing flower, its neon petals shifting through the colors of the rainbow. A door. Man in an immaculate white uniform smiled at them, his expression one of serene welcome. "You look tired, friends," the doorman said, his voice smooth as silk. "Come inside, rest. Everything you need is right here." "We don't have any money," Percy said, his voice rough. The doorman just chuckled. "Money? Oh, we don't use money here." He handed each of them a green plastic card. "A Lotus Cash card. This is all you need. The Lotus provides food, games, a soft bed. No worries, no deadlines." The last 2 words seemed to hang in the air. Annabeth and Percy exchanged a look. It was too good to be true. But they were so tired. The lobby was a cool, clean oasis after the desert heat. The air smelled of lotus blossoms and clean linen. Music, low and pleasant, drifted from unseen speakers. People of all ages milled about, laughing, playing games, looking utterly, blissfully content. "This place is weird," Annabeth whispered, but her shoulders were already losing some of their tension. "I'm just going to get one real burger," Percy declared, his eyes locked on a food court that seemed to offer every cuisine imaginable. "Then we'll go." Arian didn't say anything. He was extending his senses, trying to parse the nature of the power that permeated this place. It wasn't divine in the Olympian sense. It was more subtle. It felt like a genjutsu, a massive, complex illusion woven into the very fabric of the building. It preyed on the senses, yes, but it went deeper, touching the mind, soothing anxieties, dulling purpose. And beneath it all, that cold, dark thread of primordial power was present, not as a threat, but as the foundation. Erebus wasn't attacking here, he was offering a gilded cage. "It's a trap for the soul," Kurama observed, his own immense chakra a bulwark against the casino's influence. "These fools are walking into a dream from which they may never wake." Arian watched Percy devour a burger and fries with a look of pure ecstasy. He saw Annabeth's eyes light up at the sight of a massive, multi-level library filled with interactive displays on engineering and architecture. He saw Grover happily munching on an enchilada with extra tin foil. They were losing themselves, the sharp edges of their quest-honed anxieties being smoothed away by the casino's relentless, placid hospitality. He grabbed Percy's arm. "We need to go." Percy pulled his arm away, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "Dude, chill. We just got here. What's the rush? Let's just play one game." He gestured to a vast arcade, more advanced than anything Arian had ever seen. The games were holographic, immersive. Percy, the boy who was always a step behind, always labeled with a learning disability, was drawn to it like a moth to a flame. Here, he could be a hero in a world that made sense. Arian turned to Annabeth. "Annabeth, we're leaving." She was staring at a large, holographic globe, her fingers tracing the outlines of continents. "In a minute, Arian. Look at this. It's a complete city planning simulation." You can redesign everything. The traffic flow of Manhattan, the structural integrity of Olympus, it's brilliant. The urgency, the worry that had been her constant companion, was gone. Replaced by a scholar's intense focus. He had lost them. The illusion had taken root. He knew he couldn't just drag them out. Their minds were already caught in the web. To rip him out now would be like waking a sleepwalker on a ledge. The shock could be more dangerous than the dream. He had to go in after them. He found Percy first, deep in the arcade. He was in a shooting game. A futuristic landscape of chrome and neon. He wasn't just playing. He was in a state of perfect flow, his ADHD, which made classrooms a nightmare, making him a god in the chaotic world of the game. He laughed, a carefree sound Arian hadn't heard in weeks. Arian picked up a controller at the station next to him. He didn't play the game. He hacked it. He fed a stream of chakra into the console, not to destroy it, but to rewrite the code on the fly. On Percy's screen, the generic alien enemies suddenly morphed into the Furies, into the Minotaur, into Medusa. The futuristic cityscape flickered, becoming the dark, rainy road to Camp Half-Blood. Percy faltered, his laughter dying. Hey, what's going on? Arian's character appeared in the game, standing before him. He didn't look like the game's avatars. He looked like himself, holding his dark ninjutsu. This is a distraction, Percy, Arian's voice said, coming from the game's speakers. You're forgetting. Forgetting what? Percy asked, his eyes still glued to the screen. Mom, Arian said, one word, a blade to the heart of the illusion. She's in the underworld. Hades has her. The solstice. The war. The images on the screen intensified. A vision of their mother. Her face sad and frightened, trapped in a cage of bone. A vision of the sky tearing apart, lightning striking the sea. The illusion fought back, the images trying to dissolve into the bright, cheerful colors of the arcade, but Arian's will was stronger. Percy dropped his controller, his hands shaking. The blissful haze in his eyes cleared, replaced by horror. Oh, gods, he breathed, looking around at the arcade as if seeing it for the first time. How long have we been here? Too long, Arian said, pulling him to his feet. Stay with me. Don't let it pull you back in. Where's Annabeth? They found her in the architectural simulation room. She was standing before a massive, holographic table, a look of serene accomplishment on her face. Before her stood a perfect, gleaming model of Olympus, redesigned, improved. And standing beside her, smiling, was Luke Castellan. It's perfect, isn't it? The illusion of Luke said, his voice exactly as Annabeth remembered it. Full of charm and warmth. We did it, wise girl. A new age for the gods, designed by us. Annabeth, Percy said, his voice urgent. She looked up, a dreamy smile on her face. Percy, look, Luke and I fixed Olympus. Arian knew he had to be careful. Annabeth's illusion was woven from her deepest desires, her ambition, her need for recognition, and her complicated, painful hope for Luke. He stepped forward. That isn't Luke, Arian said, his voice calm but firm. Of course it is, Annabeth said, her brow furrowing in confusion. The Luke illusion smiled. Don't listen to him, Annabeth. He's just jealous. The real Luke gave Percy a gift, Arian continued, his eyes locked on Annabeth's, forcing her to focus. A pair of winged shoes. They had a tracking device in them, Annabeth. From the people who attacked us in the woods. The real Luke betrayed us. He held out his hand, palm up. He used a flicker of chakra, a minor genjutsu of his own, to project the image of the transponder into her mind. The memory of him crushing it under his boot. The illusion wavered. The perfect, gleaming Olympus flickered. The smile on Luke's face became strained. He's lying to you, Annabeth. Trying to turn you against me. Your greatest strength is your mind, Annabeth, Arian pressed, his voice sharp. Your fatal flaw is hubris, the belief that you can fix anything, that you can save anyone. You can't save him. This isn't him. It's a dream, and it's enslaving the smartest person I know. Annabeth squeezed her eyes shut, her hands clenched into fists. No, she whispered, but the logic, the cold, hard truth of Arian's words, was a poison to the fantasy. The holographic Olympus dissolved. The Luke illusion distorted, its handsome features melting away, and then it vanished. Annabeth stood alone in the room, tears streaming down her face, the blissful peace of the illusion replaced by the raw pain of a betrayal made real. "Come on," Orion said, his voice softer now. He pulled her and Percy towards the exit, Grover stumbling along behind them, looking confused. But as they reached the main lobby, their path was blocked. A man in a perfectly tailored white suit stood waiting for them. He was unnervingly calm, his smile pleasant, but his eyes were ancient and held no warmth. The casino manager, a son of Hypnos, the god of sleep, corrupted and empowered by Erebus. "Leaving so soon?" the manager asked, his voice the auditory equivalent of a velvet blanket. "But you haven't seen our premium suite." He waved a hand, and the lobby around them dissolved. They were no longer in a casino. They stood on a familiar street, under a bright blue sky. It was Kanahagakure, the village hidden in the leaves. The Hokage monument looked down from the mountain, but there were only 4 faces. The air was peaceful. People in familiar shinobi gear walked by, smiling, nodding at them. Annabeth and Percy were gone. He was alone. A hand clapped him on the shoulder. He turned. A tall man with spiky blonde hair and a white coat stood beside him, a brilliant, proud smile on his face. Minato Namikaze, his father. "Naruto," he said, his voice filled with a love Orion had only ever dreamed of. "Come on. Your mother's waiting." She made ramen. Kushina Uzumaki was there, her red hair a fiery banner, waving from the door of their small house. She was alive. They were both alive. He wasn't an outcast. He wasn't a Jinchuriki. He was the celebrated son of the 4th Hokage. "This can be your reality," the manager's voice whispered, echoing from the peaceful sky. "No quest. No burden. No broken little brother who needs you to save him. No angry gods. Just the life you deserved. The life that was stolen from you. You can be Naruto Uzumaki again. All you have to do is stay." The pull of it was a physical force, an agony of longing so intense it made his knees weak. This was everything he had ever lost, everything he had ever mourned in the dead of night when he thought no one was watching. He could feel Kurama stir within him, a complex mix of sorrow and rage at the sight of his first true friends. He looked at his parents' smiling faces. The perfect illusion. It offered peace. It offered an end to his long, lonely war. But then, another image rose in his mind, unbidden. Percy, standing on a beach, a terrified 12-year-old boy with a magic sword, facing down a god of war for him. Sally Jackson, her warm smile, the woman who had taken in a strange, silent child and loved him without question. Annabeth, arguing with him, challenging him, her sharp mind a whetstone for his own. This illusion offered the past. But his life, his duty, his family, was in the present. He turned to the image of his father. The pain in his chest was a physical thing. "My name," he said, his voice cracking but resolute, "is Orion Jackson." He spoke his new name into the heart of his old world, and the illusion shattered. The force of his will, his acceptance of his new identity, was an anchor of reality that the dream could not withstand. The peaceful village of Konoha dissolved like smoke, and they were back in the lobby of the Lotus Casino. The manager was still smiling. But there was a flicker of surprise in his ancient eyes. "A pity," the manager said. "Your soul is so much more interesting than the others. Erebus would have cherished it." Orion didn't answer. He grabbed Percy and Annabeth, and they ran. They burst through the doors of the casino and into the night. But it wasn't night. It was late afternoon. The sky was a different color. The cars on the strip were different models. A newspaper in a stand near the door read, June 20th. "No," Percy said, his face pale. "That's impossible." They had been in the Lotus Casino for 5 days. They had 2 days left until the summer solstice. 2 days to get to Los Angeles, find the entrance to the underworld, confront a god, and fly back to New York. The quest had gone from impossible to a joke. They stood on the Vegas sidewalk, the weight of their failure crashing down on them. But they were different. Percy looked at the Lotus cash card in his hand and crushed it, his expression hardened with a new resolve. Annabeth's tears had dried, leaving behind a cold, clear anger. And Orion, for the first time in this life for his last, felt truly whole. He had faced his ghosts and chosen his future. The gilded cage was broken, but the race against time had just begun. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. Kingdom of the Father. Panic was a bitter, metallic taste in Percy's mouth. 2 days. 48 hours to cross the rest of the desert, find the underworld, steal back a lightning bolt from the god of the dead, and get it to New York. He was spiraling, the sheer impossibility of the task threatening to drown him. Annabeth was doing calculations in her head, her expression grim, running through travel times and probabilities, each one more hopeless than the last. Orion, however, was a rock of infuriating calm in their sea of despair. While they paced and panicked on the Las Vegas sidewalk, he was already moving, his eyes scanning the flow of traffic, his mind dissecting the problem not as a tragedy, but as a tactical challenge. Panic is a luxury we don't have, he said, his voice cutting through their anxiety. Annabeth, what's the fastest way to LA from here? A flight, she said, her voice strained. But Zeus would blast us out of the sky. A bus would take too long. Maybe if we could steal a car. No, Orion said, we need something faster. Something they won't expect. He looked at Percy, his sea-green eyes intense. You said the water healed you. That you could feel the river. What do you feel now? Percy frowned, confused. What? I feel the heat, the smog, 1,000 toilets flushing in the casinos. Focus, Orion commanded. Past that, your father is the Earthshaker. His domain is not just the sea. It's the water in the ground, the moisture in the air. Feel it, call to it. It sounded insane, but Percy was desperate enough to try. He closed his eyes, filtering out the noise of Vegas. He tried to do what Orion said, to reach out with his senses, to feel for water. At first, there was nothing. Then, a faint tremor. A deep, resonant hum from beneath the asphalt. It wasn't just the city's water mains. It was a vast, powerful presence, an aquifer deep beneath the desert. And it felt familiar. It felt like home. And it felt like it was answering him. A deep rumble shook the ground. A fire hydrant a block away exploded, sending a geyser of water 50 feet into the air. The tourists on the sidewalk screamed and scattered. Good, Orion said, a flicker of approval on his face. Now bring it here. Percy focused, and a wave of power surged through him. The ground at his feet cracked, and a spring of clean, cool water bubbled up from the pavement, pooling around their ankles. It wasn't much, but it was a miracle in the middle of the desert. What now? Percy asked, panting from the effort. Now we call for a ride, Orion said. He knelt, placing his hand in the pool of water. He closed his eyes, and Percy could feel a different kind of power radiating from him. Not the wild, untamed energy he himself wielded, but something focused, controlled, and immensely powerful. Orion wasn't asking the water for a favor, he was giving it an order. He sent a pulse of pure chakra into the water, a sonar ping encoded with a simple, urgent message: Poseidon. Emergency. His sons require transport. Immediate. The coast. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, the water in the pool began to glow with a soft, green light. The light intensified, coalescing into a shimmering form. A hippocampus, a magnificent creature with the head and forelegs of a white stallion and the shimmering, scaled tail of a giant fish, materialized from the water, its intelligent eyes blinking in the harsh Vegas sun. It was fully grown, its mane like sea foam, radiating an aura of profound, oceanic power. It lowered its head and nudged Percy's chest gently, as if greeting a long-lost friend. No way, Annabeth breathed, her jaw slack with astonishment. Get on, Orion said, already swinging his leg over the creature's broad back. It'll be faster than a car. The hippocampus carried them west, not over the land, but through it. It created a current of moisture, a tunnel of liquid potential that it swam through, the dry desert landscape a mere blur on either side. They moved with the speed of a freight train, the wind whipping past them, the strange, watery dimension they occupied shielding them from the harsh sun. It was a breathtaking, terrifying, and utterly impossible ride. They arrived at the Santa Monica beach as the sun was beginning to dip towards the horizon, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. The hippocampus deposited them gently on the sand and then dissolved back into the waves of the Pacific, leaving them standing there. Soaked and disoriented, they had crossed a state in a matter of hours. Okay, Percy said, looking at his brother with a new level of awe. How did you do that? I asked, Orion said simply, offering no further explanation. The Pacific was a vast, restless expanse, and standing at its edge, Percy felt a surge of strength. He walked into the surf, and the waves greeted him like an old friend. He felt a presence in the water, a Nereid, one of his father's servants. She gifted him 3 white pearls, a gift from Poseidon. "Use them when you are in dire need," she whispered, her voice like the sigh of the tide. "Smash one at your feet, and what belongs to the sea will always return to the sea." A way out of the underworld. His father was helping them. Their search for the entrance to the underworld led them to a seedy, washed-out recording studio called DOA Records. The lobby was filled with listless, translucent spirits, waiting for their final audition. The ferryman, Karen, was a skeletal figure in an Italian suit, demanding payment they didn't have. After a failed attempt at bribery with casino drachmas and a near-death experience for Percy, they finally managed to buy passage with a handful of drachmas Annabeth had been saving. The river Styx was a black, oily sludge, flowing through a cavern of breathtaking despair. The whispers of the dead, the ghosts of forgotten dreams and endless regrets, echoed from the shores. Percy and Annabeth were visibly shaken by the sheer weight of sorrow. Arion, however, remained impassive. The river felt familiar. It was a place of endings, a nexus of spiritual energy. He had seen the Sanzu River, the border of the Pure Land, in the memories Kurama carried. This was its Greek cousin, but it felt incomplete. A river of despair with no corresponding shore of peace. The shores of the underworld were a nightmare of black volcanic sand and endless fields of asphodel, where the shades of the dead drifted aimlessly. In the distance, the palace of Hades loomed, a fortress of black obsidian that seemed to absorb the faint, eerie light of the cavern. Guarding the path was a monstrous, 3-headed dog the size of a mammoth. Cerberus. Annabeth, using her training, tried to distract it with a red rubber ball, but the beast was not in a playful mood. It growled, its 3 heads snarling, its eyes like molten lava. "Bad doggy," Percy muttered, his hand on Riptide. Arion stepped forward. He didn't draw his sword. He held out his empty hands. The beast's growls intensified, its gaze fixed on him. Arion could feel the creature's nature. It wasn't truly evil. It was a guardian, immensely powerful, but also lonely, trapped in an eternity of thankless duty. And he could feel something else. The raw, untamed chakra of the beast was immense, but it was chaotic, unfocused. "It is a beast, like me," Kurama said, a note of strange kinship in his voice. "Bound, chained, let me speak to it." Arion opened a channel. He let a sliver of Kurama's own immense, demonic chakra bleed into the air. It was a scent no demigod could perceive, but to a creature like Cerberus, it was like the roar of a far greater predator. The 3-headed dog stopped growling. Its ears flattened. The snarling heads looked at Arion not with aggression, but with confusion, and a flicker of something that looked like fear. Arion held out his hand again. One of the heads, the one in the middle, hesitantly leaned forward and sniffed his fingers. Arion didn't flinch. He slowly, deliberately, began to scratch the beast behind its massive, leathery ear. A low rumble started in the dog's chest. It wasn't a growl, it was a purr. The other 2 heads, seeing that he was not a threat, leaned in as well, nudging him like oversized puppies. Percy and Annabeth stared, their mouths hanging open, as Arion Jackson, the silent, deadly shinobi, gave the guardian of the underworld a belly rub. Cerberus collapsed onto its side with a ground-shaking thud, its 3 tails thumping happily against the black sand. "How in the—" Annabeth started, but couldn't finish the sentence. "He was lonely," Arion said, stepping past the now docile hound. "Let's go." They walked the path to Hades's palace unchallenged. The palace itself was a place of cold, silent majesty. The throne room was vast, the floor polished obsidian that reflected their terrified faces. The throne of Hades was carved from a single, massive block of the same black stone, inlaid with skulls of gold and silver. And on the throne sat the Lord of the Dead. Hades was not a monster. He was a god, and his presence was terrifying. He was huge, at least 10 feet tall, with skin as pale as bleached bone and eyes that burned with a cold, black fire. He radiated an aura of ancient, absolute power, the bitter strength of a king who had been denied his birthright. His wife, Persephone, sat on a smaller throne beside him, her expression one of bored resentment. "Perseus Jackson." Hades's voice was a low, resonant boom that vibrated in their bones. And the strange shadow that follows him. His black eyes fixed on Orion, and for the first time, Orion felt a flicker of unease. Hades's gaze was not like Ares's, which saw only a warrior. Hades saw the soul. He saw the cracks, the seams, the places where one life had been grafted onto another. You do not belong here. Not in this world. We came for the bolt, Percy said, his voice shaking but defiant. You stole it. Hades laughed, a cold, humorless sound. You accuse me. Look in your own pack, little hero. Percy looked down. The backpack Ares had given him felt strangely heavy. He opened it, and his blood ran cold. Lying inside was Zeus's master bolt. It was a 2-foot-long cylinder of celestial bronze, humming with a power that made the air crackle, a power that did not belong in the realm of the dead. It had been planted on them. Ares, the god of war, had played them all. He wasn't just a thug, he was an agent of chaos. And my helm of darkness is also missing, Hades continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. And I see you have brought me the thief. The shadows in the corners of the room deepened, coalescing into spectral warriors. You have brought me the lightning bolt of Zeus, and you have come to my kingdom with a weapon of my own domain hidden in your possession. Why? Oh, you are either a fool or a pawn in a much greater game, Perseus Jackson. The god's gaze shifted to Orion. But you are no pawn. What are you? Before Orion could answer, the winged sneakers on Grover's hooves activated. Their wings fluttering wildly, they began to pull him, dragging him across the polished floor towards a deep, dark pit that had opened near Hades's throne. Tartarus. The shoes were cursed, another one of Luke's treacherous gifts, designed to drag the wearer and the bolt into the deepest abyss. Grover bleated in terror as he was dragged closer to the edge. Orion reacted instantly. He threw a kunai with a wire attached, the blade embedding itself in the stone floor. He grabbed the wire, anchoring himself, and then lunged, tackling Grover just as the satyr's hooves scraped the edge of the pit. With a surge of strength, he ripped the shoes from Grover's hooves and flung them into the abyss. They stood, panting, at the edge of the pit, the bolt lying on the floor beside them. They were trapped, accused of being thieves, with no way to prove their innocence. It was then that Percy remembered his mother. Give her back to me, he demanded. She's the reason I came. You were in no position to demand anything, Hades snarled. You have the bolt. The deal was, my helm for your mother. You have failed. Percy looked at the 3 pearls in his hand. He could save himself and 2 friends. His mother would be left behind. It was the last part of the prophecy. You shall fail to save what matters most in the end. The choice was agony. Orion put a hand on his shoulder. We get the bolt to Zeus, he said, his voice low and steady. That is the mission. We stop the war. We will come back for her. I promise you that. Percy looked at him, his eyes full of anguish. But he saw the iron certainty in his brother's gaze. He nodded. He handed a pearl to Annabeth, one to Grover. He raised the last one. This is not over, Hades, Percy said. It is, the god boomed. You will not leave this realm alive. Percy smashed the pearl at his feet. He, Annabeth, and Grover were instantly encased in milky white bubbles, which shot upwards, pulling them towards the distant, cavernous ceiling. Towards the world of the living. Orion was left alone, standing before the god of the dead, the master bolt lying at his feet. The spectral warriors of the underworld closed in around him. Hades rose from his throne, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. Now, Shadow, he said, you will tell me what you are. And then you will cease to exist. Orion didn't look afraid. He simply bent down and picked up the master bolt, its divine power humming in his hand. He looked at the Lord of the Dead, and a slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. You really want to play this game? He asked. Fine, let's play. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. A Throne of Lies. The throne room of the underworld was a vacuum of sound and hope. The spectral soldiers of Hades formed a silent, tightening circle around Orion. The Lord of the Dead loomed over him, a figure of absolute authority in his own domain, his eyes burning with the cold, black fire of ancient grudges. Percy and the others were gone. Shot upwards towards a life Orion was no longer guaranteed to see. He was alone, disarmed of his companions, standing at the precipice of oblivion. Now, Shadow, Hades boomed, his voice echoing in the vast dead space. You will tell me what you are, and then you will cease to exist. Orion looked at the god, then down at the master bolt in his hand. Its power was an alien thing, a humming, electric storm of life and sky that felt profane in this kingdom of dust and endings. He met Hades's gaze, and for the first time since entering this realm, he smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. It was sharp, dangerous, and utterly devoid of fear. You think you've won, Orion stated, his voice calm, almost conversational. It was a stark contrast to the god's resonant fury. You think you hold all the cards. I am a god in his own throne room, holding a mortal at his mercy, Hades snarled. The cards are irrelevant, are they? Orion hefted the master bolt, its way. GHT feeling both immense and insignificant. This doesn't belong here, does it? The core symbol of your brother's power. Raw, untamed creation. I wonder what would happen if I were to, say, lose my grip. If all of that energy were released down here, uncontrolled, it would certainly redecorate. Hades laughed, a cold, grating sound. You would be vaporized before the first spark touched my throne. I would, Orion agreed easily. But I'm not the one who has to rule a kingdom of tormented souls that have just been scrambled by a few billion volts of heavenly lightning. You'd be cleaning up the mess for centuries. He took a step towards the throne. But that's just a threat. It's crude. I prefer logic. You're being played, Lord Hades. Played. The god's eyes narrowed. Who gave us the backpack? Ares. Who sent us on a fool's errand to retrieve his shield, wasting our time? Ares. Who benefits most from a war between Zeus and Poseidon? Not you. You'd be dragged into a messy conflict that would upset the balance of souls. But Ares, the god of war, would be in his element. He thrives on chaos. He is the one who took your helm and his father's bolt, and he used my brother, a child, to deliver them to you and ignite the war he so desperately craves. Every word was a carefully placed stone, building an argument of cold, irrefutable logic. Hades's expression flickered, the first sign of doubt appearing in his black eyes. He was an outcast, a king of paranoia. The idea of a conspiracy, of being manipulated by his arrogant, war-mongering nephew, resonated with his bitter soul. Even if that were true, you are still in my power, Hades said, though his voice had lost some of its absolute certainty. Are you sure? Orion asked softly. He closed his eyes. Kurama. Just a little. Show him. With pleasure. The fox's voice rumbled in his mind. Orion didn't move, but the energy in the room shifted, fundamentally and terrifyingly. A pressure, immense and suffocating, slammed down on the throne room. It was not the cold, heavy pressure of death that Hades commanded. It was its antithesis. A wave of raw, untamed life force, so potent and so furious it felt like a star exploding in the dark. A deep, crimson aura, laced with black, malevolent sparks, bled from Orion's skin. It was the chakra of a tailed beast, a living incarnation of rage and power, an energy that was Ison to the stagnant despair of the underworld. The shades of the dead in the asphodel fields, miles away, shrieked and dissolved at its touch. The spectral soldiers recoiled, their forms flickering. The very stones of the palace seemed to groan in protest. Hades himself took an involuntary step back, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. He was the god of the dead, the master of souls and endings. This was the power of a soul that refused to end, a will that could unmake creation itself. He was staring at a mortal boy, but he was seeing something far, far older. What are you? Hades breathed, the question now holding a note of genuine, horrified curiosity. The crimson aura receded, pulled back under Orion's iron control. I'm the one offering you a better deal, he said, his voice steady despite the strain. Let me go. I will retrieve your helm and expose Ares for the traitor he is. I will deliver your vengeance for you. All I ask in return is that you release my mother. And if I refuse, then I'll get the bolt to Olympus myself, one way or another, Orion said. There will be a war, Ares will get what he wants, and you'll still be missing your helmet. And my mother will remain your prisoner. But I promise you this, Lord of the Dead, I will come back for her. And next time, I won't be asking. The silence that followed was absolute. Hades stared at him, the ancient, calculating mind of a god weighing the options. On one hand, the satisfaction of destroying this anomaly. On the other, the return of his most powerful symbol of office and the humiliation of his nephew. Vengeance, he decided, was a sweeter prize than a single soul. My wife's gardens need a new decoration, Hades said, a cruel smile touching his lips as he looked at Sally Jackson, who was standing frozen like a statue in a globe of magical light. She will remain here, as collateral. Bring me my helm, Shadow, and you may have her back. Fail, and she will be a permanent resident. He waved a hand, and a section of the obsidian wall behind Orion dissolved, revealing a dark, swirling tunnel. Now go. Use the back door. I have a feeling you're accustomed to the shadows. Orion nodded once. He walked into the tunnel without a backward glance, the master bolt held firmly in his hand. The darkness swallowed him whole. He emerged onto the Santa Monica beach with a disorienting lurch, stumbling out of a shadow cast by the pier. The sun was setting, bleeding across the horizon. Percy, Annabeth, and Grover were huddled together on the sand, their faces etched with despair. They looked up as he approached, and Percy's face was a storm of relief and disbelief. Orion, how did you? Hades and I came to an agreement, Orion said, his voice tight. There was no time for explanations. He could feel a presence approaching, a hot, arrogant power signature that reeked of blood and cheap leather. He's here. As if on cue, the roar of a Harley-Davidson echoed down the beach. Ares appeared, parking his chopper on the sand, his fiery eyes hidden behind his sunglasses. He had a baseball bat slung over his shoulder, and a smug grin on his face. Well, the war god drawled. Look what crawled out of the sewer. I was starting to think you got lost. You got my package. It wasn't for you, Percy snarled, stepping forward, his hand gripping Riptide. He was shaking, not with fear, but with a white-hot rage. He understood now. The backpack, the shoes, the false quest. It had all been a game to Ares. You framed us. You stole the bolt and the helm. Ares laughed. You're not as dumb as you look, kid. Yeah, I did. A little chaos, a big family feud, best fireworks show in centuries. It was going to be great. But you had to go and mess it up. Give me the helm, Percy demanded. So I can get my mother back. You want it, Ares said, his grin widening. He spun the bat in his hands. You're going to have to take it. His form began to shimmer, growing larger, more menacing. I've been itching for a real fight. Let's see what a son of Poseidon can really do. This is his fight, Orion, Annabeth whispered, grabbing his arm. She had seen what he could do. And she knew he could end this quickly, brutally. But she also knew that this was a battle Percy had to face alone. Orion nodded, his eyes narrowed, analyzing the god of war. Stay on the defensive, Percy. He called out, his voice sharp and tactical. Use his aggression. Let the water do the work. He's all power, no finesse. Percy didn't need to be told twice. As Ares charged, he retreated into the surf. The duel began. It was a clash of raw, divine power against the desperate courage of a boy who was just beginning to understand his own strength. Ares was a whirlwind of violence, his bat now a massive, two-handed bronze sword. Percy was outmatched in strength and skill, but in the water, he was in his element. He used the waves to block, to dodge, to throw Ares off balance. It was a beautiful, terrifying dance of god and demigod against the setting sun. Orion watched, a silent sentinel, but his attention was divided. He felt them before he saw them. The faint, sterile hum of electronics. The subtle distortion in the air of active cloaking fields. The ADTF had found them. Annabeth, Grover, get back. He commanded, pushing them behind him. From the shadows of the pier and the dunes, figures emerged, a dozen soldiers in the same matte black tactical gear, their energy rifles raised. This was not a scout team. This was a full-blown capture squad. And in the center, directing them with hand signals, was a woman in a sleeker, more form-fitting version of the armor, her helmet displaying a commander's insignia. All units, target the Olympian, the commander's synthesized voice ordered. Cold and precise. Neutralize. Target Alpha is secondary. I want him alive. They opened fire, not with bullets, but with thick, semi-translucent cables that shot from their rifles, crackling with a blue containment energy. They weren't trying to kill Ares, they were trying to trap him. Ares roared in fury, batting the cables away with his sword, the impacts exploding in showers of sparks. "Insolent mortals," he bellowed. "You dare." The distraction was the opening Percy needed. As Ares turned to face the new threat, Percy summoned the largest wave yet. It crashed down on the god, staggering him. "Now, Percy!" Arion yelled. Percy charged, riptide a bronze streak, and thrust his sword forward, aiming for the god's heel. But the ADTF was relentless. Two soldiers broke off, aiming their weapons at Arion. "Alpha is exposed. Take him." Arion moved. He was a blur, a shadow against the dying light. He didn't engage them head-on. He used their own tactics against them. He threw a handful of wet sand at one soldier's helmet, momentarily blinding his sensors. He slid under the legs of the other, his hand striking a precise point on the back of the soldier's knee, disabling the powered articulation of the armor. The soldier went down with a surprised grunt. He flowed between them, his hands a blur, not striking to injure, but to dismantle. He ripped the power packs from their rifles, rendering them useless. He severed the hydraulic lines on their armor with a kunai. He was a ghost in their machine, a surgeon of sabotage. Just as he disabled the last soldier in his immediate vicinity, he heard a roar of divine rage and pain. He looked over. Percy had done it. Riptide had pierced Ares's heel, and golden ichor, the blood of the gods, was trickling into the sand. Ares staggered back, his form flickering, revealing his true, divine nature, a being of pure, incandescent energy. The sight was blinding. The mortals, even the ADTF soldiers, screamed and shielded their eyes. Ares uttered a curse, a promise of future suffering for Percy, and then dissolved in a flash of golden light. The battle was over. The ADTF commander, seeing her primary target vanish and her squad being systematically dismantled, gave the order to retreat. They vanished as quickly as they had appeared, leaving behind a few disabled soldiers and pieces of damaged equipment. Silence descended on the beach, broken only by the crash of the waves. The master bolt lay on the sand where Ares had dropped it. But something else was there, too. A dark, twisted piece of metal, like a battle-worn ram's horn. The helm of darkness. A leathery flapping of wings announced a new arrival. Alecto and her two sister Furies landed on the beach. They ignored Percy and Annabeth, their ancient eyes fixed on Arion. Alecto gave a stiff, formal bow. "Lord Hades is grateful," she hissed, the words sounding like they pained her. "You have kept your word. The helm is returned." She picked up the helm. "His prisoner will be returned to her home, unharmed." The Furies then vanished into the darkness, taking the helm with them. Sally was safe. They had won. Percy collapsed onto the sand, the adrenaline leaving him weak and shaking. He had faced a god and survived. Annabeth and Grover rushed to his side. Arion walked over to the disabled ADTF soldier, the one he had first taken down. He ripped the helmet off, revealing a young man with wide, terrified eyes. Arion knelt, his expression cold. "Tell your commander," he said, his voice a low, dangerous whisper. "Her name is Thorn. Tell her the next time her hunters come for me, I won't be so gentle." He let the man's head drop back onto the sand. He had seen the name on the ADTF data chip. Now, they knew he knew. The war had just become personal. He picked up the master bolt. They had it. They had won the battle. But the sun had completely set. They had less than 24 hours to get the bolt from Los Angeles to the top of the Empire State Building in New York. The race wasn't over. It had just entered its final, desperate lap. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The Serpent in the Heart. The flight from Los Angeles to New York was a nerve-shredding ordeal. Every flicker of the cabin lights, every bump of turbulence, sent a jolt of adrenaline through Percy. He sat rigid in his seat, the master bolt concealed in a long cardboard tube. Imagining Zeus waiting in the clouds above, ready to swat them out of the sky like a fly. Annabeth was no better, her knuckles white as she gripped the armrests, her ormy eyes scanning the clouds for any sign of divine retribution. Only Arion seemed unaffected. He sat by the window, his gaze distant, his breathing slow and even. He wasn't relaxed, he was in a state of heightened awareness. His senses extended, feeling the pressure of the air on the plane's fuselage, the life signs of every passenger, the faint, angry hum of the sky god's domain around them. He was a coiled spring, ready to react to a threat he knew was unlikely to come. Zeus won't strike the plane, he said, his voice a low murmur that cut through Percy's anxiety. How can you be so sure? Percy whispered, his eyes darting towards the cockpit. Because the bolt is on board, Orion explained, his logic cold and simple. He wouldn't risk destroying it. He's angry, but he's not stupid. He'll wait until we're on his home turf. The logic was sound, but it didn't make Percy feel any better. He was the hero of the hour. He had faced down monsters, tricked gods, and survived the underworld. He had even wounded the god of war. But sitting in a cramped airplane seat, he felt like a terrified 12-year-old again. He looked at his brother, the silent, unshakable pillar of strength. And a question that had been bothering him for days finally surfaced. In the underworld, Percy began, his voice low. How did you get Hades to let you go? Orion's gaze shifted from the window to his brother. He saw the genuine curiosity, the need to understand. Hades is a king who believes he's been wronged. He's bitter and proud, Orion said. I didn't offer him a threat. I offered him a deal that appealed to his pride. I promised him the one thing he wanted more than our lives, vengeance against the nephew who made a fool of him. You promised you'd get his helm back, Percy said. And I delivered, Orion replied. Deals based on mutual self-interest are the only ones that hold. He saw the confusion on Percy's face. The world isn't a simple contest of good versus evil, Percy. It's a web of competing interests. Gods, mortals, even monsters. Everyone wants something. The key to winning isn't being the strongest, it's understanding what your opponent wants and using it. The lesson hung in the air between them. More profound than any sword-fighting drill. Percy was beginning to understand that the battles Orion fought weren't just with his blade, but with his mind. EY landed at JFK with a handful of hours to spare, the sky over New York a threatening, bruised purple. A storm was brewing, a reflection of the turmoil on Olympus. They took a cab to the Empire State Building, the driver barely glancing at the massive lightning bolt Percy was carrying. The mist, Orion noted, was a wonderfully convenient thing. The 600th floor was a place that shouldn't exist, a floating city of white marble palaces and golden braziers, all perched on the peak of a mountain that pierced the stormy clouds. Olympus. It was breathtaking and terrifying, a city of impossible beauty and overwhelming power. Gods and goddesses, nymphs and satyrs walked the streets, their expressions grim. The tension was a physical force, a static charge in the air. They were escorted to the throne room, a cavernous hall where 12 massive thrones sat in a U-shape around a central hearth. The beings in the thrones were so immense, so radiant with power, that Percy could barely look at them. At the head of the room sat two gods who dwarfed the others. Zeus, king of the gods, his face a thundercloud of rage, and beside him, a man with the same sea-green eyes as Percy, his expression a mixture of pride and worry. Poseidon, their father. Percy approached the thrones, his legs feeling like lead. He knelt and laid the master bolt at the foot of Zeus's throne. Lord Zeus, he said, his voice trembling. I return what is yours. Quote, Zeus's hand descended, and the bolt flew into it. As his fingers closed around it, the tension in the room lessened, the brewing storm outside the windows calming slightly. You have done me a service, boy, Zeus rumbled, his voice like grinding stones. But the thief has yet to be punished. The thief was Ares, Percy declared, launching into the story of their quest, of the gods' treachery, of the helm and the cursed backpack. When he finished, a heavy silence filled the room. Zeus's pride was a fragile, dangerous thing. To admit he had been tricked by his own son was a bitter pill to swallow. It was Poseidon who broke the silence. You have proven your worth, my son, he said, and his voice was the sound of the deep ocean, full of power and a surprising warmth. You have the hero's heart. Percy felt a lump in his throat. It was the first time his father had ever spoken to him. The first time he had been claimed, truly claimed, not by a symbol, but by the god himself. But Zeus's stormy gaze was not on Percy. It had moved, settling on the silent figure standing near the entrance of the throne room. And what of this one? The sky god demanded. This, other son. The one my brother kept hidden. The one who stinks of foreign magic and ancient rage. The one the Lord of the Dead saw fit to bargain with. All eyes, the blazing sun of Apollo, the cool silver moon of Artemis, the sharp, analytical gray of Athena, turned to Orion. He stood unbowed, meeting their divine scrutiny without a flicker of fear. "I am Orion Jackson," he said, his voice clear and steady, holding no trace of the awe or terror that should have gripped a mortal in this place. "Son of Poseidon, brother of Perseus Jackson, you radiate a power that is not of this world," Athena said. Her voice like the chime of a silver bell, but with an edge of sharpened steel. "Your soul is layered. Wrong. Explain yourself." "I have nothing to explain," Orion replied, his gaze unwavering. "My loyalty is to my family. My purpose was to protect my brother on his quest. I have done so. The rest is my own concern." A dangerous rumble of thunder echoed outside. "Insolence!" Zeus roared, rising slightly from his throne. "You are in the presence of the gods of Olympus. We can unmake you with a thought." "You could," Orion conceded, his calm utterly unnerving. "But you won't. You need to know what I am. You fear the unknown, and right now, I am the greatest unknown in your world. To destroy me would be to destroy the answer to a question you can't bear to leave unasked." He had seen the core of their being in his studies. They were beings of immense power, but also of immense pride, paranoia, and curiosity. He was playing their own nature against them. Poseidon rose, placing a calming hand on his brother's arm. "He is my son, Zeus. He has proven his loyalty. He fought for Olympus. He fought for his brother." Zeus shot back. "There is a difference." The debate raged, but Orion had already won. He had planted the seed of doubt, of curiosity. To destroy him now would be an admission of fear. The council ended with a grudging verdict. Percy was hailed as a hero. Orion was put on notice. He would be watched. He was a weapon of unknown origin, a storm of unknown strength, and they would keep him close until they decided if he was a tool to be used or a threat to be eliminated. The return to Camp Half-Blood was a hero's welcome. Percy was paraded on the shoulders of his fellow campers, a laurel wreath placed on his head. He was the hero who had journeyed to the underworld, faced the god of war, and averted a divine catastrophe. He was no longer Percy Jackson, the troubled kid from Yancey. He was Percy Jackson, savior of Olympus. Orion watched from the sidelines of the celebratory bonfire, a small, knowing smile on his face. He saw Selene watching him from across the flames, her twilight eyes full of questions he knew she would ask later. For now, he let Percy have his moment. The victory was real, but Orion knew it was a temporary reprieve. Ares was still out there, humiliated. The ADTF was regrouping. And the primordial darkness of Erebus was still watching, patient and silent. The true end of the quest came the next day, not with a bang, but with a whisper of betrayal. Percy was in the training arena, trying to come down from the high of his adventure. When Luke approached him, a friendly smile on his face. "Hey, hero," Luke said, tossing him a Coke. "One last sparring session before you rest on your laurels." They went into the woods, to a secluded clearing Percy had never seen before. Luke was charming, asking about the quest, praising Percy's courage. But Orion, who had been tracking Luke's chakra signature since they returned, followed them. A ghost in the trees. He had felt the cold bitterness in Luke flare when Percy recounted his victory. He knew what was coming. "The gods are using you, Percy," Luke said, his friendly demeanor finally cracking, revealing the steel-hard resentment beneath. "They're selfish, neglectful parents. They use their children as pawns and then cast them aside. Look at me. Hermes never cared. He gave me a quest one could never win. The gods are complicated," Percy said, echoing Orion's earlier words. "But they're not all bad." Luke laughed, a sound devoid of any real humor. "You're still blind, but you'll see. There's a new power rising. A golden age is coming, one that will cast down the tyrants of Olympus." He spoke of Kronos, the Titan Lord, of a revolution to restore the world to a better, stronger time. He offered Percy a place in his new world. When Percy refused, Luke's face twisted into a snarl of contempt. "If you're not with us, you're against us." He snapped his fingers, and from a fissure in the ground, a scorpion the size of a wolf scuttled out. Its tail was arched, its stinger dripping with a poison that sizzled on the leaves. A pit scorpion. One sting was fatal, A little parting gift. Luke turned and ran, leaving Percy to face the monster alone. The scorpion lunged. Percy stumbled back, tripping over a root. This was it. This was how the prophecy would be fulfilled. Betrayed by one who calls you a friend. But before the stinger could strike, a black streak shot from the trees and embedded itself in the scorpion's eye. A kunai. The monster shrieked and staggered. A second later, Orion dropped from the branches above, landing silently between Percy and the beast. He didn't even look at the scorpion. His cold, furious gaze was fixed on Luke's retreating back. You chose the wrong side, Castellan, he called out. Luke stopped, turning to face him, his own sword, Backbiter, appearing in his hand. You, he sneered. The freak. The anomaly. This doesn't concern you. You threatened my brother, Orion said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. That makes it my concern. The scorpion, maddened with pain, charged Orion from the side. Orion didn't even turn his head. His left hand shot out, catching the beast's stinger in his palm. Black venom dripped from the wound, but he didn't even flinch. He tightened his grip, and with a surge of chakra-enhanced strength, he tore the stinger and a section of the tail clean off the monster's body. The scorpion collapsed, twitching, and then dissolved into dust. Luke stared, his bravado faltering. He had never seen such casual, brutal power. He charged, his blade, a wicked fusion of celestial bronze and tempered steel, aimed at Orion's heart. The fight, if it could be called that, lasted less than 5 seconds. Orion didn't even draw his sword. He sidestepped Luke's desperate thrust, his hand chopping down on Luke's wrist. The sound of bone cracking echoed in the clearing. Luke cried out, dropping Backbiter. Orion spun inside his guard, his other hand striking a series of precise points on Luke's chest and neck. Nerve strikes. Luke's body locked up, his muscles spasming. And he fell to the ground, paralyzed and helpless. Orion stood over him, his face a cold mask of disappointment. You have so much potential, Luke, he said. So much strength. But you let your bitterness poison it. You chose to serve a master who will use you and discard you just like the gods you hate. He bent down and picked up Backbiter. He looked at the paralyzed, terrified son of Hermes. I'm not going to kill you, Orion said, tossing the sword onto the ground just out of Luke's reach. You're a symptom of the disease, not the cause. Killing you now solves nothing. He turned his back on him. Go, run back to your master. Tell him the sons of Poseidon are coming for him. He walked over to Percy, who was still on the ground, staring at the scene with wide, horrified eyes. The wound on Orion's hand was already closing, the potent monster venom being systematically destroyed and purged by Kurama's healing chakra. He helped his brother to his feet. When they looked back, Luke was gone. The paralysis had faded just enough for him to crawl to his sword and escape. The safety of camp, the joy of their victory, it had all been a lie. The enemy wasn't in the UNDER world or on some distant battlefield. He had been living beside them, eating with them, training with them. The serpent had been in their own garden all along. The quest was over. The war had just begun. Chapter 9 End.